Any meat is better than any plant because all meat is good for you and every plant causes harm, at least to a certain degree. Animals do not eat a variety. We are the only animals that are eating a variety, and that is not in our best interest. When you eat exogenous carbohydrates, it has hormonal effects. So the whole idea about calories in, calories out is not a very good model.
Several people asked me to check out Dr. Chaffee, and I found a video, I started watching it, and I could say right away, I was so encouraged by the fact that you said, eat a biologically appropriate diet. It was the first thing I heard you say. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And then someone's asking about, gallstones, etc. And you explained in such normal, natural language that our body is expecting a certain amount of fat intake in the day. And therefore, it's making bile to go along with that. If you don't eat enough, you could eventually get gallstones. I was in shock of how simply you explained that. But also what shocked me was that there's a normal amount of fat to eat. Like something I had never heard before in all the conversations I've heard doctors have about why we get gallstones. So of course I was like, I have to talk to you. And then I reach out to you and right away you answer. I'm like, okay, this man, I was so impressed. I want to start off by asking a question after watching a few of your videos that kind of, again, shocked me. It seems like what you're telling us is that we don't need to eat veg at all.
Yeah. No, we don't. And for a large portion of our biological past, we haven't. And in fact, even in recent cultures that have been large, we call them hunter-gatherers, but what they really were hunters. Such as the Plains Indians in North America, they would have the bison herd would come through and they would do what's called like a bison drop or a buffalo drop. And they would scare part of the herd over a cliff and they would fall and die. And then they would harvest the bodies and they would dry the meat and that would be their food for the rest of the year. And so they largely ate meat the entire year. If they were to eat plants, it would generally be for medicinal purposes or because they were starving. And if they had a plentiful supply of meat, they really wouldn't eat it just for fun. And they didn't need to eat it for health either. And they were extremely healthy. There's a study in 2001 that showed that at the time, the Plains Indians in North America were the tallest population of humans on Earth. And they were very healthy. They didn't have all the diseases of the West that we see elsewhere. They're now just called chronic diseases or non-communicable chronic diseases. And they're getting more and more prevalent every single year, every single decade. They're going up and up. And now we're starting to call them human diseases because now we're seeing dogs and cats have a rise in prevalence of human diseases over the past 40, 50 years as well. And then you have zookeepers and that will tell you if you feed animals what they're not supposed to eat, they can get human diseases. You feed animals human food, they get human diseases. What does that mean? That means the food is causing the disease. What is a human disease? They're talking about lupus. They're talking about diabetes. They're talking about cancer. They're talking about other non-communicable chronic diseases. The same things that dogs and cats get, the same things that we get. And the animals only get them if they were fed the incorrect food. So we can look at the Plains Indians. We can look at the native Australians who also, by all accounts, going back hundreds of years, ate nearly exclusively meat unless they were in a point of extremis when they had to eat something out. They had to branch out or use something medicinally. But you really can't say that about, well, you can sort of say, well, but they ate this other plant or whatever. And they'll say, well, they ate all these different plants, but it was when did they eat them? How often did they eat them? It was basically only when they were starving and infrequently. But you really can't make that argument about, say, the Inuit who are in the northern parts of Canada or in the Arctic Circle. There are no plants available. In certain areas, there are people living. There are simply no plants that exist. And so, they're hunting seal, polar bear, whales, those sorts of things. And they live generation after generation after generation after generation without plants. And so you clearly don't need plants to thrive, not just survive, but thrive, because you really can't survive. You can't just eke out existence in the Arctic Circle. You either thrive or you die. And they're thriving. And in fact, all our ancestors are thriving. Go back to the ice ages. People say, well, they're specially adapted to living in the snow. No, actually, we're specially adapted to living outside of the snow because we have we've developed agriculture very recently in our biological past, maybe 8,000 years, 10,000 years at max. And that's brand new. But we were living through ice ages going back 2 million years. And so we were all living in the conditions that the Inuits in the Arctic Circle are living in now. And we didn't have access to plants. And so obviously we don't need them. And people will argue, it's funny, a lot of the arguments that come up are clearly not based in any sort of fact or research. It's just completely made up because it has to be that way to support their position. And so I've heard a lot of people say that, well, when the ice sheets started coming down, people didn't live in the ice. They actually migrated towards the equator. And that's maybe what they would do if things started getting colder and colder. But that's not what our ancestors did. In fact, Homo habilis has shown, the fossil record is very clear, that when the ice shelf started coming down, Homo habilis started actually migrating up into the ice. So we not only survived ice ages in the ice, we not only thrived, but we became the most dominant species on the planet during the ice age. I think because of the ice ages, because it forced our ancestors to manifest their destiny as apex predators, and not just apex predators, but the most successful apex predators that have ever existed. Because of our brains and because of our tool using ability, we became super predators. We weren't just taking off the stragglers, the young, the sick, the elderly. We were going after the alpha. We were going after the biggest and the best examples, because that was the one that had the most fat on it. That was the one that was the healthiest, and we could take that down. And we were able to do that. That's very uncommon in the animal kingdom. And we were able to do that. And we've been doing that for millions of years now, and we still do it. And so, no, you don't need to eat plants. You definitely don't need to eat plants. And the thing is that you don't want to eat plants. So it's not that you don't need to eat salad. You can get all the nutrients you need from meat, which is true. But you don't want to eat the salad, because the salad actually can be harmful to you, is harmful to you. And that's because plants defend themselves just like animals do. If you're out in the wild and you're trying to take down a bison, you're going to need tools. You're going to need tactics. You're going to need a way to take that down. It's not going to be easy unless you know what you're doing and you have the right tools to do it. A tree is just sitting there. So why don't we just eat the leaves? Why do we go to grocery stores and buy vegetables when we can just go to any park and grab a bunch of leaves, right? Make a salad out of that. Well, because they're very toxic. Because plants do have defenses. They're not mobile. They're not kinetic. And so they have to have other defenses. Plants make about 1 million different defense chemicals. Most of them will kill you. And that's why of the 390,000 plants, most plants are inedible, meaning that they're so toxic that they will cause serious harm or even death in very small quantities. And the plants that we do eat that are considered edible are just lower down on that toxic threshold. But that doesn't mean that they're without toxins. They do have toxins. It's just we have more ability to detoxify those specific toxins than we do other things. But native populations like the Native Americans, Native Australians, who have not had agriculture in their biological past, they have not had even 10,000 years to adapt to some of these toxins. And so they're just getting hit with it right now in the last 100 years or so, when they've been really incorporated into Western civilization, especially native, like the Plains Indians. Was only when the American buffalo, the bison, were wiped out in the late 1800s, they were sort of forced into eating non-carnivorously. And then the Native Australians, the same thing, late 1800s, early 1900s, they were forced into basically they took the children of the Aboriginal communities and fostered them in British schools and tried to westernize them. And so that was when things started changing for them as well. And the health of these people have dramatically gotten worse. The chronic disease rates in the Native American populations and Native Australian populations far outstrip the European populations in those areas. And when I first came to Australia 5 years ago, I was told very early on that if I have an Aboriginal patient that comes in, to whatever their age said on their folder, to just add 20 years to that and consider them 20 years older than that, because they just age faster and they break down faster. And so when you have someone who comes in and they're 35 or 40, you have to start considering diseases that you would only see in elderly populations elsewhere, because their body just is breaking down so quickly. That's because they're not used to eating these plant toxins. So That's the whole reason. That's the whole thing. You don't need to eat them. In fact, you don't want to eat them. They're not optimal for us.
What you said earlier was that we were going against the ice. We were going towards the colder weather, and we were seeking the fattier animals, which right away says that our body wants fat. Like we somehow we knew this and we're trying to get it. Almost every doctor that we're going to go see is telling us that we're overweight because we've eaten too much fat, that we're sick because our cholesterol and all these things related to fat. And honestly, I have so many people reach out to me trying to understand, like, what am I supposed to do in these situations? So first, I'm thinking food. If I'm not supposed to eat any, is it any, like all of them are dangerous? 'Cause you said lettuce. Well, you said salad, but are you talking even lettuce?
Yeah, I mean, there's some that are less offensive than others, but they'll all have these things. And so, I mean, even grapes and avocados, we say, oh, well, those have to be good for you, and they're fruit, so the plant wants you to eat them. They'll actually make a cat very sick. Why is that? Because there's toxins in there, and the cat is not able to cope with those toxins as well as we would be able to. But when you look at wine, they have all these. Red wine has a lot of tannins and other sorts of things in it, and we talk about like, oh well, you don't want all that stuff, all that sort of stuff. Those are the defense chemicals. Tannins are a type of defense chemical, so that's in the grape. Even though that's a fruit, and the plant wants something to eat the fruit, it does not necessarily want you to eat the fruit. It wants generally birds to eat the fruit, and most fruit on Earth will still kill you. If you get lost in the woods and you start looking at random berries and fruits that you should not ever eat, a berry that you don't recognize as safe, because it's probably not, if you don't recognize it as safe. That goes for plants too, especially goes for plants, because they really don't want you to eat them. Maybe the fruit, maybe you can think about that, but still most fruit will kill you. The cassowary bird is a tropical bird here in Australia and elsewhere. Frugivores, they only eat fruit. And there's about 150 varieties of fruit and berries that they eat. Every single one will kill you. Every single one will kill everything except a cassowary bird, because those seeds have to go through the digestive tract of a cassowary bird, or else they won't germinate and they won't turn into a plant. In fact, if a cassowary bird leaves an area or dies out, those plants die out, because they have to go through the gut of a cassowary bird. So it has to be extremely advantageous to the cassowary bird and enticing, and also very detrimental if something else tries to eat it. So it has to be a big deterrence to the wrong thing eating it, and rewarding to the right thing eating it. And that's how the world works. That's how nature works. It's kill or be killed. They have to protect themselves, and the seed is a plant's baby, and a fruit is trying to carry those seeds somewhere. So it wants a specific animal eating that. So yes, there are things that are better or worse. I mean, like I said, 390,000 plants in the world, almost every single one will kill you. Given enough of this stuff, not even all that much, right? If you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant, because most of them will make you very, very sick. So of the foods that we eat, of the plants that we eat, there's definitely a gradient there and gradations of things that are harmful, but all of them have defense chemicals. And some people, again, one of these made up arguments, they'll say, well, no, we've been breeding them to be safer and safer as it goes. So maybe that was before, but now not so much. Actually, if you talk to farmers, they'll tell you they actually want the more toxic crops, because those are most resistant to pests, because they make their own pesticides, they make their own insecticides. Long before we had people spraying crops with pesticides, plants existed, and they weren't getting destroyed and completely eradicated by insects and animals, because they make their own poisons, they make their own toxins. And so that's what GMOs are. That's where people say, oh, these GMOs are so harmful. And it's like, okay, but that's sort of the point. You have a crop that is resistant to locusts, and you have another crop that's resistant to everything except locusts. And then you take that protein out from the locust resistant crop that makes them resistant to that. You put it in over here. Now they're resistant to locusts. Why are they resistant to locusts? Because there's a poison in there that will kill the locust, even though it's resistant to the other poisons. Okay, well, that makes it more toxic to us too. You're adding more poison to this. That's the whole point. And that gives better crop yields. That allows you to grow more crops, less insects eat it, you produce more of a product, and you get to make more money. That's in the farmer's best interest, and also in food growing interest. I mean, it gets better crop yields. And you're in third world countries and you're trying to grow food for people. You need crops that will weather an insect invasion and these sorts of different these different sort of hardships that will come to your crop. And so some things will be cold resistant, heat resistant, drought resistant sort of genes, and those are GMO sort of additions that can be added. But there are additions that can make things more toxic. So yes, some things are less toxic than others, but I should rephrase that. It's not that they're less toxic than other things. It's that we are more capable of detoxifying the toxins in certain plants than others. But those plants that we eat will kill most other animals. We can't eat eucalyptus. Think about it this way. Koalas eat eucalyptus. These are very toxic plants to us and other animals. That's why almost nothing else eats eucalyptus. So they don't really have to compete for resources. But koalas don't eat anything else. And while eucalyptus would make us very sick, spinach would make a koala very sick. And so, they can't eat the things that we eat more safely. And so that's the whole idea. And this is something I was taught in 7th grade biology, and yet you just sort of forget it. It gets washed over by just being inundated with, oh, you got to eat your veggies. Veggies are so good, all this sort of nonsense. But I was flat out taught in 7th grade that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive. And then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons and specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. And that becomes their dedicated food source. So if you step out of that evolutionary arms race, the other side is just growing without you. And you might have some holdover defenses. We come from an herbivorous past. About 6 to 8 million years ago, we started scavenging and trying to eat meat and started using tools actually to crack open the skulls of dead animals to get at the brains, very nutritious. We were doing that for a couple million years before we figured out how to break it in such a way that we can make a sharp edge. And the first workstone tool that we found it's been dated to be about 3.3 million years old, and that was with Australopithecus, it's believed. And then things really started changing. Then we were able to kill animals. We were able to cut them up ourselves because we didn't have claws, we didn't have teeth. We needed tools to do this. And then about 1 million years later with Homo habilis, that was when we first started seeing apex predator behavior. They were able to now start getting the animal themselves. They were able to take down the whole animal, get all the meat, all the organs, everything like that. And you see a spike in our evolution from there. Our brain size and our height started growing exponentially after that, as compared to our growth prior to that. So we have some defenses from millions of years ago, but really for the past 2.5 million years, we've been apex predators. We've just been eating meat. Maybe we've eaten some plants to survive. And as a survival mechanism, that is beneficial if we're starving. A lion, if it runs out of meat, it can't eat. There are no plants that a lion gets to eat to survive. It gets meat or it dies. So we've been able to weather different sort of famines by having different access, being able to get nutrition from other sources. But that doesn't mean that it's optimal for us. It doesn't mean that it's good for us. It doesn't mean that it's not toxic to us, just like an avocado can seriously poison a cat. There are objectively toxins in there. It's just we can deal with those toxins better than we can, say, in hemlock, where half a leaf will kill you, give you intractable seizures, and you'll be dead in 2 minutes. It's more about the defenses to the toxins as opposed to more or less toxicity in the plant.
We eat such a wide variety of plants. Isn't this a multiple effect? Like I'm eating all these different fruits, vegetables, so isn't that adding up in me? So even if I could have survived, oh, I ate an orange, 1 orange this year. Okay, no problem. My body dealt with it. But if every single day I'm eating multiple different types of fruits and veg, it makes me believe from what you're saying, then I'm putting myself in a dangerous scenario.
Yeah, as Dr. Georgia Ede, who's a Harvard psychiatrist, she said, probably the last thing you want to do is eat the rainbow, because you're actually getting a wide range of some very toxic, harmful effects. And they can, obviously her field is mental health, so it can cause a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress and damage to the brains and the neurons, and can actually precipitate mental health issues like major depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar, ADHD, and even schizophrenia. And she and others, such as Professor Chris Palmer, also at Harvard, they are finding that changing people's diet, getting rid of these things, putting people on a more ancestrally appropriate, biologically appropriate diet for humans is actually reversing and putting into remission major psychiatric issues like schizophrenia. People are not having hallucinations anymore. They're not thinking that the government's following them and tracking them and coming to their house, or they're not seeing people that aren't there, things like that. So it's amazing what this can do. It's amazing what harm we're causing ourselves. I mean, the illnesses that we're seeing now just simply did not exist in the numbers that we're seeing them at any other time in human history. We've been listening to doctors, we've been listening to politicians and the drug companies and the food companies, all saying the same thing: don't eat fat, don't eat meat, eat more plants. Plants are healthy, and yet we've become the fattest and sickest that human beings have ever been in our entire existence. And if you think about it from a variety point of view, you're absolutely correct. You will never see an animal in the wild eat a variety of things, certainly not a variety of plants. They eat very specific plants because, again, they're in that evolutionary arms race. They only have the adaptations to detoxify certain plants or certain families or classes of plants. And so they branch outside of that, and they're going to start running into toxins that they can't deal with appropriately, and they'll get sick. In fact, there's a whole field in large animal veterinary medicine that deals with these sorts of diseases that aren't really diseases. They come from eating the wrong thing. An animal in the wild, it's very uncommon for them to eat things that they wouldn't be adapted for. It can happen, but it's mostly in pastures. If an animal's in a pasture and they're just there for too long and they just eat down the forage and they're not getting hay or whatever, they might start eating plants that they're not really designed for. And so there are all these different sorts of diseases like big head, big tongue, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome that are actually brought about by eating the wrong plant, and they get toxicity from these plant toxins. And I'll do you one better. There's
Wellness Warrior, I have a favor to ask you. Sharing our stories is what will help new people to understand that keto actually works. So if you have improved your health, mental health, or weight through eating healthy keto, please look in the description. There's a form to fill out so that we can do an interview and you can share your story. I want to help more people, and I think that together we can help people to understand that keto is more than a diet. It's a way of life that gives you your life back. I'm not a special snowflake. I know that you also have lived amazing things. So let's change this together. The form's below.
Nutritional deficiencies that have names that are very similar to ours. In fact, cows have muscular dystrophy. They can get muscular dystrophy just like humans can. It's exactly the same presentation from what I understand, speaking to veterinarians, large animal vets. It's basically the same thing, but it's called nutritional muscular dystrophy, because they figured it out. It's actually a selenium deficiency. And so if the cow's not getting enough selenium, they'll develop muscular dystrophy. It sort of begs the question, well, maybe ours is brought about by some sort of deficiency, possibly selenium, which is a trace element, and you may not be getting enough of it. Or maybe someone has a genetic predisposition to not be able to process it properly, and they need a lot more of it. But, I don't know if anyone's ever asked that question, but I just sort of learned about this recently, and it's very interesting. But animals, anyway, they've figured this out. Instead of just saying, well, it's lupus, it's diabetes, it's cancer, we don't know. We don't know. they actually looked into it and they're like, okay, what's going on with that? Oh, that is from this toxin in this plant and it's causing this effect. So they have these names, big head, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome, but they understand that this comes from these different toxins in the plants that they eat. So animals do not eat a variety. Nothing eats a variety. Cows eat grass, and they eat very specific grasses. They don't even eat all the different kinds of grasses. You can put sheep and cows on the same pasture. They don't compete for resources. They eat different grasses. And so, they stay very narrow in their diet. Same with lions and dolphins and bears and wolves and giraffes. They eat very specific things. I mean, koalas, they eat eucalyptus their whole life. And so, that's a very mundane, very monotonous diet. They don't look sad to me. If you've ever seen a cow eating grass, it's like big, rich, thick grass. They just get so excited. In very cold parts of the world, such as Canada, sometimes they'll keep cows in barns for the winter because it's just too harsh in certain areas. And then when they're letting them out for the spring, the cows will get out on the green grass and they just start jumping and bucking. They're just so happy. They're like, yes, grass. And then they just start eating voraciously. So they're fine eating a monotonous diet. And that's very normal in the wild. And so, I eat a very monotonous diet and I love it. And that's the thing. It tastes good when you're hungry. And when you're hungry, it's great. And then you stop eating when it doesn't taste good. But that's the thing, animals do not eat a variety. We are the only animals that are eating variety, and that is not in our best interest. That is always going to be a problem. If we are evolved and biologically adapted to eat plants, it's going to be very specific plants. It's certainly not going to be the crazy variety of plants that we eat. It's going to be very specific plants, and it would have to be something that existed 50,000 years ago during an ice age. Not many plants exist during ice ages. That's kind of the point. But if we needed something, if we were adapted to something, it would have to have been something that was around for a long period of time. The plants we eat now, some of these haven't existed for a few thousand years. Some of them have existed a few hundred years. A lot of these things have been hybridized and bred to be very different than their native origins. I mean, corn does not exist in the wild. Broccoli does not exist in the wild. Cauliflower does not exist in the wild. And these fruits are far more sweet and large. They're grown to be much, much, much more sweet and much larger than they would ever have been in our biological past, even 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. Apples are going to be small, little crabby, sour things. They're not going to be these big, giant, sweet things like we have today. So, these are just not the plants that we even had access to 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. So even if we are designed to eat certain plants, which we're not, then it would be specific plants. It would not be the variety. It wouldn't be none of the plants we're eating now because none of these things existed 20,000 years ago.
When I'm talking to clients and we're trying to figure out what's the next steps, what do you people want to know how to heal themselves, right? And and a lot of this is happening because they've gained weight or some kind of diagnosis has been handed to them. Okay, you have this. Those are two scenarios where people are now looking to me and saying, "Wow, help me to figure out what to do next," right? Where do the carbs play into this? I guess is one of my questions right now, because that's the most I've heard spoken about. The carbohydrates are causing inflammation and we seem to get stuck there. Whereas with everything you're telling me now, my eyes are looking wider than that. How do we marry those things back together? Because we do make glucose. So glucose isn't the problem from what I understand. But help me understand, how do I help people better?
The thing about carbohydrates is, yes, we do make it ourselves, but it is important to keep it in balance. When you eat exogenous carbohydrates, it has hormonal effects. So the whole idea about calories in, calories out is not a very good model. First of all, calories is a measure of heat energy, but we're not a combustion engine. We're not a steam locomotive. We're not burning these things in our body. And actually, a lot of them are used for structural components. The amino acids are used to build the different protein molecules in our cells, not just proteins for muscles, but our DNA codes for protein. So every molecule that our DNA codes for is made out of amino acids. It is a protein. And so those are the building blocks. They aren't being just burned up for energy. That's not what it is. It's not wood for the fire. Same with the fat. Some fat and cholesterol that's just used as structural components. It's not simply used for energy. Some of it is, but not all of it is. Like the omega-3 fatty acids that only come from meat that are required, they're essential, like DHA and EPA. This makes up a major portion of the structural components of your brain. So about 20% of your brain is made out of DHA, and another portion is made out of EPA. Another portion is made out of cholesterol. You need these things, and they're structural components. And yes, if you burn them, 9 calories of heat will escape for every gram, but that's not what they're being used for. And again, we don't burn them even when we do. Chemical energy is very different. These are chemicals. They're complex organic chemicals. They have complex chemical interactions in your body. And the carbohydrates and other sorts of amino acids, they have different chemical interactions in your body. They have different hormonal interactions and reactions in your body. So most carbohydrates will raise your blood sugar, that will raise your insulin, and that will have other hormonal effects around your body. First and foremost, insulin is the fat storage hormone. You really can't store fat without insulin. We see this in type 1 diabetics. They lose the ability to make insulin. They cannot put on fat. They waste away until they die unless they get insulin. And then you have people with an insulinoma, someone that has a tumor that secretes insulin, and they get massively obese very quickly. It doesn't matter what they eat. So it's hormonally driven. And insulin blocks leptin, which is a satiety hormone. It's also a master hormone. It hits into your hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls what comes out of the pituitary. These are all these hormones that are going to hit your adrenal axis as well. So there's a very important hormone, leptin is, and now you're blocking it with insulin. But fructose independently blocks leptin. Okay? So, and upregulates ghrelin, which makes us more hungry, makes us feel like we need to eat more, and we just sort of overeat. So you can have hormonal reasons why you overeat. You have hormonal reasons why you put on weight. But the whole idea of calories in, calories out, it really doesn't hold to scrutiny. And first of all, it's if you look at the origins and how it came about, it's just not what we should be using now. But also it doesn't make any sense because we're not combustion engines. These are chemicals that have chemical interactions in your body. We also need to understand that in our body, in our bloodstream, at any given time, there's about 4 grams of glucose. Just 4 grams. That's a level teaspoon of glucose. That runs all the physiological processes in your body and brain. If it goes up by 1 gram, that's a toxic dose to your body. And your body responds as if it's a toxin by trying to detoxify it, by raising your insulin to get it back down below 4 grams. Because the problem is with glucose is, yes, at a certain level, at a very small level, it provides benefits. So sort of when people talk about hormesis with these plant talk, it's probably hormetic. Well, first of all, you have to prove it. You have to show it's hormetic. You have to show what level it's hormetic. So glucose, you could say that it's hormetic below 4 grams. It provides more good than harm. Part of the harm, it is providing some harm, which is called glycation. Those glucose molecules and all carbohydrate molecules, fructose being more aggressive than glucose, physically fuse to other molecules called glycation, and then cause advanced glycation end products, AGEs. And so this actually builds up harm and damage in your body. And this is what eventually kills diabetics. When your blood sugar gets up too high, it's chronically, constantly damaging your body from the inside out. They start becoming sicker. Their tissues start being permanently damaged. They start getting kidney failure, start having their foot amputated, their leg amputated. They start to develop heart disease and infectious disease and cancers and all the rest of these sorts of things. So the glucose itself, past 4 grams, is actually quite toxic, and our bodies can't handle it past that point. And so your body's constantly trying to fight to keep your blood sugar down below 4 grams. And it's so important for your body to keep this below 4 grams that it raises insulin and completely rearranges your entire metabolic structure and physiology. And we learn about this in biochemistry. We have a fed state and a fasting state. And fasting state is when you have low insulin, and fed state is when you have high insulin. So just that high insulin completely changes your entire physiology and biochemistry. That's how important it is to your body to keep your blood sugar below 4 grams. And so I think we are doing ourselves a disservice by pumping in 300, 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, and it's just making our body just freak out and try to desperately keep this under 4 grams. It puts your brain and your heart on secondary fuel sources. Your brain and your heart's primary fuel source, and your intestines and other organs, are ketones. Why do I say that? When everyone says you need to eat sugar for your brain, even though I haven't had sugar in 6 years and I'm still alive. The reason is because when you have enough ketones and you have enough glucose, I mean, you make glucose, you make blood sugar. So even if you're in a ketogenic state, if you're in what I think is our primary metabolism, is referred to as the fasting metabolism, but I think it's our primary metabolism. It's our primary metabolic state of most animals in the wild and humans in the wild when we're just eating our natural diet, which is meat. When you have ketones and you have blood sugar, your brain only runs on ketones. About 2/3 of your brain cells, some of the brain cells some of the cell lines will run on glucose still, but 2/3 of your brain will exclusively run on ketones. It's only when your ketone level starts going down that it starts filling in the gaps with the glucose. So that's a preference. It has both available and it chooses the ketones. So that's a preference. Your brain prefers ketones. Your heart prefers ketones. Your intestines prefer ketones. The short chain fatty acids, butyrate, butyric acid, these sorts of things are the preferred energy source of your enterocytes in your intestines. So it's just so important for your body to keep this below 4 grams that it's willing to completely rearrange your metabolism, put your brain and your heart on secondary fuel sources, and upend all of your hormones and other sorts of physiological processes just as hazmat damage control to just prevent your body from raising your blood sugar by 1 gram. Because by 1 gram up, that's when you start seeing these very severe and end stage sort of diseases that diabetics would get. So carbohydrates themselves are actually quite bad. When you eat them, you need no carbohydrates. There is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. They are not required for life. Entire civilizations have never eaten carbohydrates generation after generation after generation with no deleterious effects, as long as you're getting enough protein and fat. We can use it as survival food, but it is not our optimal nutrition.
First of all, it's very clear to me from what you're saying, the lie that we need to eat fruits and vegetables is clear lie. But the other question now is, if I don't eat fruits and vegetables, my body clearly doesn't want my blood sugar to rise, but it doesn't want it to be too low either, right? Which it goes back to the fact that we make the right amount of carb. So this hormesis that you're talking about only needs to even be talked about if we're eating carbohydrates, right? Because otherwise my body would just would only make what's the right amount. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, your body's not going to physiologically, in a normal state, in a non-disease state, it's not going to make an inappropriate amount of glucose or anything else. I mean, this sort of dumps down into sort of a tangent here, but this sort of goes into the realm of LDL cholesterol or HDL or all the different sort of cholesterols that our body makes. Why would our body make a chemical in a physiological normal state, in a healthy normal state? Why would our body produce something like LDL if LDL is only toxic, or if it just LDL over time causes heart disease? Why would our body do that? Why wouldn't we have adapted some other way to live? What other animal on earth has done that? That doesn't follow. That doesn't make biological sense. And it really doesn't make sense when you realize that the first heart attack diagnosed on autopsy in America was in 1912. Did we not have LDL before that? I'm pretty sure we did. Were we not eating meat before that? Well, in fact, in the 1800s, we were eating more meat than we did in the early 1900s, far more meat in the 1800s than we did in the early 1900s. In fact, it was at a trough in the 1920s and 1930s in America. We were eating the least amount of meat we did in 200 years. And that was when the first heart attack showed up. And people didn't believe him because people say, oh, well, they just didn't notice. They didn't notice. I'm sorry, but that's a really lazy answer, because people have been doing autopsies by the thousands for hundreds and hundreds of years. Back to Da Vinci. Da Vinci did hundreds, thousands of autopsy, of dissections and autopsies, because he had dispensation from the church, so that the artists could look and see how the body was put together, so they could make more realistic and beautiful art for the church. This is the man who invented a helicopter 500 years ago, and you're telling me that he wouldn't have noticed, people dying, dropping dead of heart attacks and just blocked coronary arteries? Like, I'm sorry, that's not the case. Francis Bacon and all these other luminaries that described all these different sorts of workings on our body, described the entire circulatory system, described that the heart itself was pushing out this blood and how it was connected and how it worked. You just wouldn't have noticed massive blockages in the coronary arteries and wrote it down somewhere. Nowhere in the literature does that show up until 1912. And no one believed him, because they said, we've never seen this before. We never heard this before. We've all looked at thousands of hearts. You got it wrong. And it wasn't for about a decade that they believed him, because more and more started showing up. And they said, oh, okay, well, it looks like there's a new disease out there. I wonder why. During a 30-year period where we're eating the least amount of meat in 200 years, that does not make sense. So if meat causes this, if fat causes this, we should have always seen this. Hippocrates should have been describing this. Galen should have been describing this. Galen was amazing. He was like Marcus Aurelius's physician and surgeon. He wrote epic tomes on medicine. He said, I've discovered everything. All you have to do is learn me, and you don't have to experiment and trial and things like that. So for 1,000 years plus, the entire Western world just studied the works of Galen and taught that. Nowhere in there does it say anything about angina, heart disease, heart attacks, anything like that. Nothing that could describe that. Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer's dementia was first described in 1906 it was a case presentation. There was one patient that this guy had. Wow, look at this strange presentation. And it got later coined Alzheimer's dementia. There's nothing in the literature going back thousands of years that describes any disease process that is similar to Alzheimer's dementia by any other name. This is a new disease, and yet people were living to old age. I mean, my great-grandfather was born in 1875. He died in 1975. The idea that people born in the 1980s or the 1800s, I should say, died in 30 years is completely wrong. It's the average life expectancy from birth was 38 in 1850. But if you made it to 10 years old, you make it to 60, right? Because infant mortality was very high at the time. And so it wasn't until the 19th century, when we started fixing these causes of infant mortality, that the average life expectancy started picking up. But if you made it past those childhood years and you didn't die in a war or a famine, people lived actually quite a long time. I mean, they had to kill Socrates 2,500 years ago. He was 76 and he was still sharp as a tack. And, and that's why they killed him, because he was just like too smart for his own good. With a plant, by the way, they killed him with hemlock. So, that's the thing. We absolutely had elderly people, since time immemorial, and yet not until 1906 is Alzheimer's dementia described. Why is that? How can these ancient foods, these ancient diets, these ancient ways of living, how can they cause new diseases? These are new diseases. They're 100 years old at best. And yet we're blaming something that we've eaten for literally millions of years on this. You go back even further, you go back to the ancient Egyptians. They ate a lot of bread, a lot of wheat, a lot of beer, alcohol from that, right? There's something called the Eber's Papyrus, Ebers. There's a medical document. It describes angina. It describes diabetes. It describes a lot of the diseases that we're seeing now. And for the same reason, because we're eating things that we're not designed to eat. And they were eating it in large quantities. We're eating it in large quantities. Americans are eating 75, 80% plant-based. We don't realize that. With all this meat, we're eating all this meat. We're eating less meat than we did in the 1800s. And certainly less red meat, and a lot less saturated fat, a lot less cholesterol, dietary cholesterol. And so a large portion of our diet comes from plants and plant products, such as polyunsaturated fatty acids, the vegetable oil, seed oils, that are now replacing out saturated fat. So Since the 1970s, we reduced red meat by over 33%, reduced fat and cholesterol by about 30%, increased polyunsaturated vegetable oils, the heart healthy fats by over 3 times, increased sugar by about the same, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased grains, heart healthy grains, and all these sorts of things. What happened? We become the fattest and sickest that humanity has ever been. So obviously that's not the right choice. We want to go back to what we were doing before, when people were actually healthy. Don't believe the lie that people were just unhealthy. I mean, how do you survive an ice age with heart disease and gout? This doesn't make any sense, right? You're not going to do it. You have to be healthy and vibrant and vigorous in order to survive. And I mean, we could go on about this, but it is very simple. These chronic diseases did not exist before, and if they did, and if meat caused it, then we likely wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have made it through the ice ages because we were just too sick and too demented to make it anywhere. But also, we have to remember that the hard rule of biology is that of adaptation. Life adapts or it dies. And so we've been eating meat for millions of years. That's very much in evidence. So we've only been eating plants recently. That's the adaptation. That's new. Meat is established, and we've been eating this for millions of years. And so whatever is in it, if it was harmful, if cholesterol and saturated fat were harmful to us, it's not harmful to any other animal on Earth, by the way. 70% of animal species are carnivores. They eat meat and saturated fat. Herbivores that eat fibrous plants, they don't actually break down the fiber into glucose. Their bacteria in their stomach eat the fiber, and as a waste product, they produce saturated fat. And then the bacteria die off, and they absorb that as protein. So they're eating fiber, but they're absorbing saturated fat and protein. Carnivores eat saturated fat and protein. And we're the only animal species that wouldn't do well on saturated fat and protein, even though we've been eating it for millions of years and would be completely adapted to it. Makes zero sense. Whereas plants objectively have a million different defense chemicals. We've cataloged these things. We've classified them. We've named them. They're in books. It's called botany. People can study this. Most people don't. It's boring. But, if they do, they'd see all this stuff. It's not boring to me because I find it fascinating. But, most people don't study this sort of stuff. But it's there. It's there for anybody to see. There are objectively toxins in plants that we eat on a daily basis. The WHO has a whole webpage dedicated to natural toxins in the food we eat. Every single one is from a plant or an algae. There isn't a single one inherent in animals or meat, not a single one. And so if meat were so harmful and had poison in it, why would they not be mentioned in there? Why wouldn't we have records of that? Why wouldn't we say this is toxic? Then we say saturated fat is toxic. It is not toxic. We say cholesterol is toxic. It's not toxic. We make it. It's good for us. Our brain's made out of it. Every single cell is made out of it. The cell membrane is cholesterol. Your bile is cholesterol. Every hormone in your body is made out of cholesterol. Vitamin D is synthesized from cholesterol. You need cholesterol. It's vital. You'll die without it, which is why we make it. And we're not going, if it were going to cause harm, we wouldn't make it in such quantities that would harm us. Bring back full circle. I finally made it around. But the same thing with the glucose. You're going to make a certain amount that is useful and healthy for your body. You're not going to make too much. In fact, once you get too much, your body's like, whoa, no, pull it back. Why would it not do that with cholesterol? Why would we make it in the first place if this is just LDL cholesterol, just LDL equals heart disease? And that's actually not what the data shows, in fact.
One thing that I'm wondering about now is whenever we eat plants and also drink milk or eat dairy products, we're taking in fructose and galactose, which I've recently learned also have a negative impact on the liver. Do we make fructose and galactose?
So galactose possibly, fructose, no. It's certainly not essential. As far as I understand, there's no biochemical process, no physiological process in our bodies that require fructose at all. I think maybe like the only thing is like in sperm, sometimes they might have fructose in there, but I don't think it's required for them to have fructose, and certainly not fructose that we would ingest. And if that were the one, that's the only one. But as far as I understand from people like Dr. Robert Lustig, who's studied fructose metabolism extremely closely with the biochemistry department at UC San Francisco, and he himself has his undergraduate degree in biochemistry from MIT. And he said repeated times that there are no biochemical processes in our body that require fructose. None. Like glucose, yes, we use glucose, but we make the glucose. We don't need to take it in exogenously. So glucose is not an essential nutrient. It's a nutrient, but it's not an essential nutrient because we make it ourselves. But fructose isn't even a nutrient. Now it can be used as fuel, but it's not necessary to use as a fuel. We have other better things that we use. Also, it gets metabolized into the same byproducts as alcohol in our liver. And so we think about this way, you ferment fructose and it turns into alcohol, and then our body detoxifies the alcohol and gets broken down in our liver. But there's sort of a fermentation process with the fructose, and then it sort of carries that through, and then it breaks down into the same byproducts. So the same chemical cascade that comes from breaking down alcohol, getting a fatty droplet, and then all these different sorts of harmful chemicals as a result of that happens with fructose as well. And so you get fatty buildup and deposit in your liver. I actually learned that in medical school. That was taught to us in our biochemistry portion of medical school. And so that was known then. And then I saw Dr. Robert Lustig's work later that year it came out. So that was something that we've known biochemically about fructose, is you get these fatty droplets, you get this. And that's what I thought, you don't want to do that because it's really a fatty kind of sugar. And again, back to fat. Fat's bad. And so if you eat fructose, it's a fatty kind of carbohydrate. It turns into fat in your liver. And that's true. And that's going to cause non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We used to understand that fatty liver disease was something that really you only see in older alcoholics who just drank so much that their liver sort of built up this fatty deposits. How do you get foie gras? How do you get fatty liver in a goose to make foie gras? You stuff a feeding tube down its throat and just pump in grains, carbs. You just overload the liver and it just builds up fat in the liver. You can do it with fructose. You can do it with alcohol. And then in the 1980s and 90s, the prevalence of type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease started going up. But at the time, they weren't called that. Fatty liver disease was caused by alcoholism. Type 2 diabetes was called adult onset diabetes because it really only happened in adult, often when they were alcoholics. And then juvenile diabetes was what we call type 1 now. And I remember this. I remember seeing this on the news. They were saying, wait, what's going on? There's this 10-year-old who has adult onset diabetes, but he's not an adult. He's a kid. And then he's got fatty liver disease, but only alcoholics get fatty liver disease. This kid's never had a drink in his life. So what the hell is going on? And instead of actually thinking about this for 1 second and thinking like, okay, what's changed in our environment? What's this kid exposed to that normally wouldn't see? They just said, probably happening all the time. Probably just didn't notice it. There's just the laziest excuse for an answer. But people do it again and again and again and again. And it's like autism. It started going up in the 90s and the 2000s. It's probably just didn't notice it. If you have a family member with autism, you notice it. And that doesn't explain. Maybe we just weren't paying attention before 1980. Fine. But that doesn't explain why it increased in the 1990s and the 2000s and the 2010s and the 2020s. It's going up decade by decade by decade. Is that just because we're still not paying attention and we're only now starting to wake up? Doesn't make any sense. So they renamed these diseases type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease instead of actually doing some damn work and trying to figure out what the hell was going on here. And it's been since proven that you can reverse fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in children by just removing fructose. Keeping the carbs, still eat junk food, just remove fructose, and the fatty liver disease goes away. And that was something that Professor Lustig showed in experimental data in kids a few years ago. So, it's none of these carbohydrates are necessary. There isn't a single essential carbohydrate. It's not just glucose. It's fructose and galactose and every single other one, right? So, that's something that we can completely do without.
Okay, so my body doesn't make fructose and we don't need to eat it. So I have so many people that the next question is, okay, what am I going to eat? Over and over, what I hear you saying is red meat. I have a question. Red meat versus white meat versus poultry versus fish, eggs. Are they equivalent? Is there a reason that you say red meat? Because I hear you. You don't just say meat. You say red meat. Why are you making that distinction? Help people understand that.
Well, first of all meat is good. All meat is good for you. It's not like there's some meat that's bad. And if you had a choice between, a chicken drumstick or a pork chop, maybe you should have the salad instead. No, all meat is good. And any meat is better than any plant because all meat is good for you, and every plant causes harm, at least to a certain degree. And even if they're more or less neutral, they're at least not providing the benefits. They're not having all the essential amino acids and fatty acids and other sorts of micronutrients that you can only get in abundance in meat. And some things that simply don't exist, such as B12, B7 is very low. And so many more like DHA, EPA, and many, many more that we don't even necessarily have cataloged that are essential that come from meat and only from meat. There was a paper that recently came out that estimated there were over 51,000 essential nutrients just in red meat. And that you really needed to eat meat in order to get these things. The reason that red meat, ruminant meat, seems to be better is basically because of what we're feeding the poor things. They're not being fed what they're designed to eat either. And so they're being fed plants that they're not designed to eat. And if you're eating a plant that you're not designed to eat, you're not going to be able to detoxify it as readily as you would something else. And so we give pigs and chicken, corn and soy, which they're not designed to eat, and they're not able to detoxify these things appropriately. And some of those things can get into their meat. And their fat actually has a much higher level of linoleic acid, which is the plant omega-6 fatty acid. So omega-6s from meat would be things like arachidonic acid. And say, oh, well, you need omega-6s because you need to turn that into arachidonic acid. Like ALA, you need to turn it arachidonic acid. You get that from meat. Linoleic acid, alpha linoleic acid is the omega-3 that you can't turn into the omega-3s that we actually need. So people say, oh, you need omega-3s and you get it from plants. But you can't get it from plants. They don't turn into DHA and EPA. That's ALA. That's not what we need. And then LA, which is linoleic acid, is omega-6. It's very unstable. It breaks down very readily, causes a lot of inflammation and a lot of oxidative stress. And so that can be a problem. If people are more sensitive to this, if they're eating, pork, chicken, or farmed fish, because a fish is a carnivore, and yet we're giving them grains and kibble, we're giving them wheat. I mean, wheat doesn't even exist in the ocean. It's like, why the hell would you give a fish wheat? Of course, they're not going to be as healthy as they would normally be. Fish that are fed, that are farmed, that are fed this stuff, they don't have any omega-3s. They don't have any of the DHA and EPA because they get that from the food they're eating. They get that from the other fish that they're eating. And that's why fish are so high in in DHA and EPA, because they eat other fish that are high in DHA and EPA. But if you break that part of that link in the food chain, and you just give them a bunch of wheat, corn, and soy, there's no DHA and EPA in wheat, corn, and soy, and so the fish aren't going to get it either. So it's really not healthy eating. It's not nearly as healthy to eat farmed fish. There's still good. It will still provide benefit for you, but it is in the scale of things, it's not nearly as good as other things. The ruminant animals, because of their complex digestive system, are much better able at detoxifying plants and detoxifying things that they're not necessarily designed to eat either. So if they're fed the corn and the soy, they're better able at filtering that stuff out before it gets to you. And so if you don't have a problem with any of these meats, then eat any meat that you enjoy. Pasture-raised meats, wild game, this is going to be the healthiest. Wild game, you have to sort of worry about parasites and things like that. Farmed things, especially in North America and Canada, it's not really a problem. But it's harder to find things that are like pasture raised. If it's pasture raised, it's just eating its own forage, probably fine. But if you're just sort of buying Safeway beef or just something from the grocery store, then a lot of this stuff is going to be grain finished. And the pigs aren't going to be able to detoxify the corn and the soy as well as cows can. And so people that have sensitivities, they often will have more sensitivities to non-ruminant meat. And so especially people that have autoimmunity, they seem to be the ones that really have to stick to just red meat and water, like beef, lamb, goat, venison, and water. And they do best on that. And sometimes, even though they get rid of all the plants and all the sugar and all the grains and all the alcohol, and they improve dramatically, even bacon or pork chop or chicken leg or eggs can flare it up. And certainly dairy. I mean, dairy is a bit pro-inflammatory anyway. Like cow's milk, the casein is inflammatory. This is why there's A1 and A2 milk. The A2 milk is less inflammatory than the A1 milk, but it still has inflammatory properties. And so, especially people that are prone to these inflammatory diseases, such as autoimmunity, they just do best avoiding that. And so it's whatever meat that you enjoy, makes you feel the best, and that you can afford and have access to. But with that caveat that if you're eating pork, chicken, and fish, and eggs and dairy, and it's not agreeing with you, and you're not feeling, you're going to feel a lot better than you did when you're eating plants as well. But if you're really not feeling your best, you maybe think about just going to the red meat. Maybe try 30 days of just red meat and water and see how you go, and then add in eggs and see how that affects you. Because just I think it's mainly the product of what the animals are being fed largely, but it does seem to affect some people, but not everyone.
First of all, I have thalassemia, so I always wanted to know, like, what's the reason for people saying red meat all the time? But I don't seem to have any negatives from eating pork, chicken. Like, I don't feel a negative, so that's the positive. But I also feel like understanding that cows have a better process of detoxing. So in that later part of their life, they might clean up a bit more than the pig would have gotten able to, or the chicken and the pig though would have maybe not had as much time on a field, I guess.
Yeah, like roasters for chicken, they're genetically designed to grow just crazy big, and so they're not going to be able to forage enough bugs and things like that to grow the way their bodies demand. Their biological demand is very high, and so they sort of are given corn and soy from the beginning. So the thing is that just gets into their body right away. And the thing is that again with the linoleic acid is that they will have a higher portion of linoleic acid in their fat. So the pork and the chicken will have higher levels of linoleic acid, and that in itself can cause harm and cause buildup, especially for your brain.
What would it look like? Like, what kind of harm would I be looking for?
Well, some people theorize that it's actually the omega-6s that are causing even more harm than carbohydrates and insulin resistance, which I think is objectively shown to cause serious burden of disease. But the linoleic acid, like I said, is very fragile, and it can break down and snap apart and cause a lot of oxidative stress, free radicals, and damage. When your brain takes it up, it doesn't use it as a structural component. And it can actually, unfortunately, start using it as an energy source, but it's not designed, it's not efficient at using these big, long chain fatty acids as energy sources. It really needs the smaller molecules like ketones and glucose to run the chemical processes of the brain. So when omega-6s get in there and then they start getting broken down for energy, or they just start breaking down, they cause a lot of free radicals and oxidative stress. And that can be quite damaging to the brain, the physical structures of the brain and the chemical workings of the brain. And this can precipitate mental health issues and depression and anxiety and things like that. They also directly damage the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are something that we are now understanding as doctors and physiologists, that these are probably the most important part of the cell. And when they go wrong, everything else goes wrong. They're implicated in most diseases, and certainly things like cancer. And so they're not just the powerhouses of the cell. For people that don't know, the mitochondria are an organelle. It's like a part of the inside of the cell that produces ATP, which is the energy for the cell. And so, not calories, they produce ATP. But the mitochondria don't just sit there pumping out ATP. They move around the cell and go to certain locations and then produce ATP at that location for that receptor so that can do that job at that time, and then they go somewhere else, right? So they're like the factory workers going around using the different equipment and machines to make the whole process run. So they're very important. When they start breaking down, they start moving slower. They can't get to where they need to go in time. They get there a bit late, and they don't produce as much energy and not in time. So they're a day late and $1 short. And when you compound this from the thousands of different mitochondria that you may have in each cell, and the 400 billion to 2 trillion neurons that you have, and the 10 trillion cells that you have in your body, this causes serious, serious harm, metabolic harm and distress. And so if you have a high influx of omega-6s, and this is damaging your mitochondria, like this is going to cause rampant problems throughout all of your tissues. And there are a lot of other things that damage your mitochondria too. A lot of plant toxins damage your mitochondria as well. And now we're coming to understand that cancer is really a metabolic mitochondrial disease, because if you cut open a cancer cell, a tumor, and you look in it, you look at all the different cells in there, and we look at histology all the time as doctors, and you'll see not all those cancer cells actually have the genetic changes that we would say makes this a cancer. And then we teach that you get these groupings and buildup of genetic changes, and then all of a sudden one cell just gets all of them, and it's cancer now, and it just spreads and multiplies and grows and goes all over the body. And it's just this monoclonal grouping, right? It's just this same cell just replicating itself. But that's actually not the case. And we know this because we look at cells and we say, oh, that's one, that's one, that's one, that's one, that's one. And the rest of them actually look kind of normal. And if you look at them and you look at their DNA, they are normal, but they're behaving as cancer. Well, why is that? And why is it that some cancers have no genetic changes whatsoever, but they all have mitochondrial damage? Every known major cancer has damaged mitochondria. And they can't go through oxidative phosphorylation. They can't move around the cell and do their job. They can't make energy. They're just husks. And we see this on an electron microscope. They're just husks. They have the outer membrane, the inside cristae are all gone. And that's the important part of the mitochondria. The mitochondria are also the policemen for cell division. If something's not right and the cell says, okay, we need to stop this, we don't want to divide, it's the mitochondria that stop that and say, no, we're not doing this. And so when the mitochondria are damaged, they can't do that. And so you get unregulated cell growth and division, which is what cancer is, right? It's just tissue just growing out of control inappropriately. And when a cell is damaged to the extent that the cell just says, nope, we need to shut this down, we need to end this, we need to kill this cell, it's called apoptosis. It's the mitochondria that action that. So when the mitochondria are damaged, then the cell can just get out of control, can get damaged and just work all sorts of wrong ways, and it can multiply out of control, and it can't kill itself, and it can't stop dividing. And so that was something that was theorized by Otto Warburg 100 years ago, or nearly 100 years ago. He wrote a paper called The Origins of Cancer in 1951, I believe. And he talked about this. He talked about how this is a mitochondrial metabolic disease. There are experiments actually showing this. If you took the nuclei of cancer cells that had all the genetic changes and put them into healthy cells with healthy mitochondria, they did not behave as cancer, and you could clone them into frogs and rats and things like that and grow a frog and a rat. Whereas if you took the mitochondria out of a cancer cell and put those into a normal cell with normal DNA, it did behave as cancer. And you couldn't clone it, it would die off, and it acted horrible. And then if you're sort of the icing on the cake or the nail in the coffin was they took healthy mitochondria and put them into cancer cells, and it suppressed the cancers. So this is very, very clearly a mitochondrial disease. And linoleic acid, omega-6s damage the mitochondria. A lot of these plant toxins damage the mitochondria. A lot of genetic predispositions for cancer affect the mitochondria. And so radiation exposure and damage can damage the DNA, but also damage the mitochondria. So a lot of these things all come back to the mitochondria, and a lot of diseases come back to the mitochondria as well. And so if you have something like linoleic acid, you have high exposure to linoleic acid, you could actually produce metabolic distress even though you're on a ketogenic diet and you're not poisoning yourself with carbohydrates as well. And that, and just lastly, it's just, and that's the thing with the plant toxins too, is that yes, sugar is toxic. Over more than 1 extra gram is toxic, but it's not the only thing that's toxic. Linoleic acid is toxic. Plant toxins are toxic too. So it's in the name, plant toxin. But but that's the thing. There are a lot of things that are harmful to us. In fact, most things are harmful to us. Most things are harmful to most animals. That's why all animals need to stay in a very narrow window of what they eat, because they have to eat what they're designed for, and that's it. And if they don't do that, they're not getting what they need to survive. They're not necessarily getting all the nutrients they need in the proportion that they need them, but they're also taking in outside stressors that can damage them. And so that's the whole idea of just a meat-only diet that I espouse and I practice, is going back to that biological root where we're eliminating out absolutely everything that could potentially cause harm to us.
I heard you mention in an interview that fructose also impacts the mitochondria.
Maybe. I can't remember the exact mechanism at the moment, but probably does. That's a good question. I don't remember it specifically of whether it damages the mitochondria or not at the moment. Leave it with me. I'll look it up and refresh my memory. But it does a lot of other horrible things as well, though. It obviously is metabolized into all these horrible things in your liver, and that damages your body, and it causes the same damage to your body as alcohol, such as fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, even implicated in things like cancer and Alzheimer's. And it sends a dopamine signal to the reward centers of your brain, the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. And there are MRI studies showing that people that are addicted to methamphetamines and people that are addicted to fructose, when given an amphetamine, like you and I, or someone who wasn't addicted to these things, took this amphetamine, they would show this on MRI, and they're just, things would light up like a Christmas tree. And then people who were meth addicts, it would just be a barely twinkle. And then the sugar addicts that were metabolically sick were also given the same dose of amphetamines, same barely twinkle as the meth addicts, right? So it kills the same areas of the brain as meth to the same extent as meth, and it's damaging the body like alcohol. This is one of the worst drugs known to man, but it's legal, so we don't realize it. But I think we're in our version of the opium trade, where opium's legal and we just sell it all over the world, and people are making massive empires off of people's addiction and sickness. But we don't realize it because we don't see the effects for 20, 30 years, and we don't correlate the two. And so, with opium, at least you could see people overdosing and dying and just sitting there as a lump, and not doing anything with their lives. And we say, okay, this is a problem, we need to fix it. But the opium trade lasted a long time anyway. And, but that's what we're dealing with now. And with the added benefit to the people that are trying to perpetuate this is that they're making us sick. They know they're making us sick. And now they're selling us the drugs to mitigate the damage being done to our body. And there's a gentleman, Callie Means, who I had his sister on the podcast, Casey Means, Dr. Casey Means, and they started a company called Levels together. But she sort of switched from head and neck surgery into metabolic health, functional medicine, just saying like, this is what I became a doctor for, is like actually addressing root causes. And he was an insider. He was a consultant to all these big food and drug companies. And he said at one point, I'm paraphrasing, forgive me if I misquote, but it was something like this, which was, I know that the drug company or the food companies, that they know that the food is making us sick. They know that this is causing harm. They know this is causing metabolic distress and illness. And they're happy about it because they're selling us the drugs that then sort of mitigate and help the symptoms of this damage. And he said, I know they know this because I've been in the boardroom meetings with them when they said it. And there was a leaked slide from a Goldman Sachs meeting where it said, is it a good business model to cure disease? Right? meaning that should we cure diseases? Is that actually profitable? Could we cure people and it's cured, it's done? Or do we make medications that just treat the symptoms and make their disease state tolerable? And so they live with this disease for the rest of their life. So you have someone on blood pressure medication for the rest of their life. You have someone on diabetes medication for the rest of their life. And all these other sorts of things. You perpetuate this disease state. You make it manageable so that people can live with it and just buy their drugs every single day for the rest of their life. And of course, the drugs have other effects on the body that are negative and that you don't want. And this is deleterious to our health. And they're profiting. They're profiting off our sickness. They're selling us the things making us sick, and they're profiting on the back end by selling us the drugs that mitigate some of the damage to our body, but it's not eliminating it. It's not a freebie. People are getting sicker and less healthy and miserable. Mental health issues are going up. Physical health issues and metabolic health issues are going up. The obesity problem is worse than it's ever been in human history. And people the average life expectancy started to come down, right? So people are sicker longer, and then they die younger. We are losing decades off our life, and the reason that we're dying early is because we are sick for decades, and then finally our bodies give up. Genetically, I learned this in genetics 20 plus years ago. So this is old news, but based on the length of our telomeres, which is sort of molecule chained off our chromosomes, for people that haven't heard of this is sort of a marker of how long we're going to live. And so I was taught in genetics that we are designed to live 120 years based on our genetics, based on our telomeres. And so why are people dying in our 70s? That's literally middle age, and yet we consider that a good life. Someone gets to 85, oh, well, that they did great. They get to 90, wow, 90. Or 100, that's almost unheard of. They're still dying decades early. And they died decades early because they were sick for decades before that. And we're just not recognizing that. We're not realizing that because that's normal for us. And it's just like Rome with lead pipes. They just had decade after generation after generation growing up with lead pipes and growing up with low-grade lead poisoning. They just thought that was normal. That's how you age. That's how you grow up. That's just a normal thing. It's not normal. They figured it out eventually. We need to wake up and figure this out. We're in our lead pipes. We're chronically exposing ourselves to low-grade toxins, sometimes high-grade toxins, and we're getting sick as a result of it. People, oh, how can you say that? I ate a salad the other day and I didn't die. Okay, idiot. You also smoked a pack of cigarettes and had a bunch of drinks too, didn't you? And you didn't die there either. But over time, over the years, over decades, this stuff builds up and you get harm. And we recognize smoking and drinking as a toxin. And yet we don't die in a year. We don't die in a day unless you really overdo it. But you're really not going to do that with smoking. You just get very sick before you do that. You get very sick with alcohol too. And it's, so dying of alcohol poisoning is quite rare, but over the years, over the decades, you get chronic damage to your body, which was usually where we'd see this metabolic harm was in alcoholics. And you get the diabetes, you get the adult onset diabetes and the fatty liver disease and the dementias and things like that. Now everybody's getting them. Now we're getting precocious dementias. We're getting people in their 20s being diagnosed with early Alzheimer's. Like, what in God's name are we thinking that this is? How are we saying that that's normal? You want to say the first diagnosis of Alzheimer's was in 1906, and you have 30-year-olds saying that, oh, they have signs of Alzheimer's. It's like, why? We just didn't notice it. We just didn't notice it. We just didn't notice it. People in their 30s were getting dementia and Alzheimer's all the time. You can only say that for so long until you have to wake up and realize that we are being poisoned by our environment, and we are being willingly poisoned by buying this garbage, these drugs, this poison from these people that are responsible for the majority of nutritional studies, by the way. Coca-Cola spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research every year than the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. And that's just Coca-Cola. That's not Pepsi and Kellogg's and Nestle and General Mills and Post and all the rest of them. They all pump out tons and tons and tons of data. They are the major funders of most nutrition and dietetics associations and national associations in Australia and America and Europe, Canada. They fund these places. And that's why you have the diabetes associations saying, yeah, have pancakes with syrup. It's great for a diabetic. Are you out of your damn mind? Like, what is wrong with you that you would say that? That's honestly criminal at that point. I mean, that's you're doing something that is knowingly going to cause harm. How is that not criminal at that point? And these food and drug companies, they're doing things that they know cause harm. And it's like the tobacco companies. They knew that tobacco was causing harm for decades, and they just kept lying to Congress about it. Oh, our studies say different. No, you made those studies up. That's why they say something different. But they knew the truth. And then their memos came out that said, oh, yeah, no, we knew the truth. And so they got fined $400 billion, but no one went to jail. They knowingly kept a toxic product on the market, knowing that it was going to cause harm, knowing that it was addictive, knowing that it would kill people, knowing that it would cause cancer. And all they had to do was pay money. That's malice of forethought. That's at least criminal negligence and manslaughter on a global scale. So I don't see why these people haven't faced criminal charges. Same thing with the sugar companies. We have the sugar memos now, how they paid off multiple professors from Harvard and elsewhere to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol and saturated fat were the problem when it was really sugar. And that was published. Their internal memos were published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016. This is a matter of record. We know this was a fraud. One of those professors from Harvard was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, saturated fat increased cholesterol. Stop eating both. And he won. And that changed the entire dynamics of the world. And that's why we're still saying, oh, cholesterol, cholesterol, cholesterol. Oh, you mean that thing we make and have always made forever? No, I'm sorry. That's not a thing. And now we have documentation that this was a fraud. So that, to me, is criminal at that point. And if there is any justice in the world, they will be held criminally accountable at some point.
I have a few people in my comments that are constantly talking about the fact that they either had heart attacks or angina or something. And the question that's often asked to me is, okay, so do you take the statin and all the medications that they give you after? So you're in a quandary. You have to have a procedure now because of the foods that you were possibly eating for years before you started your good behavior. So, but now that you've had the procedure, do you take the medications after? Are those medications helping?
So it depends. It really does depend. I mean, there's some people that some of these things could help, but I think for the large majority of people, probably not. And the reason I say that, it goes to the literature from the drug companies themselves. And as I've sort of made clear here, they're out for themselves. They're not. This is not a charity. This is not an altruistic endeavor that they're going towards. They are trying to keep people on drugs long term, and so that's why they keep saying, "Oh, well, everybody over 50 just has to be on a statin." Everyone over now, they're saying people over 40, everyone should be on a statin. They're just going to keep moving that benchmark lower and lower. And they say, "Oh, well, if kids, adolescents have higher LDL, you should put them on a statin too." Get out of here. Their brain needs that. Some of these statins can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and stop your brain from making cholesterol that is used as the physical structures and components and building blocks of your brain. Adolescents have a growing brain, and you're going to stop their brain from growing and developing. There are cases in the literature, case reports in literature of people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, who were on statins long-term, were taken off the statins, 6 weeks later did not have Alzheimer's anymore. And wouldn't you know, they were put back on the statins, and 6 weeks later, they just developed Alzheimer's again. How unlucky is that? Getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's twice in your life, right? That's not what you want to do. You don't want something to impede the cholesterol metabolism in your brain. There are countless studies and papers in the peer-reviewed literature talking expressly about that. You interrupt the normal cholesterol metabolism of your brain, and this will cause dementias. This will cause neurological dysfunction. So statins do that, or at least they can do that. Some of them can cross the blood-brain barrier. And I see different papers that say different things about different statins, like atorvastatin. Some say it can, some say it can't. But either way, what's the basis for taking this in the first place? So the basis is, okay, you want to lower your LDL cholesterol. Great. LDL cholesterol is never the cause in the first place. So why do we want to lower it, right? Especially when cholesterol is such a universally good molecule in your body. All of your hormones are made out of it. Cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, DHEA, androstenedione, pregnenolone, all of these things are all made from cholesterol, all of them. So is vitamin D. If you don't have enough cholesterol in your body, you don't make vitamin D in the sun. It's actually a sun protectant. You burn more. Or you get in plant sterols, which are the plant's version of cholesterol. Plants have cholesterol. Is it bad for them? Do they get heart disease or anything like that? No. This is a normal molecule that shows up in life. And then it's close enough to our cholesterol that our body doesn't make enough of it, but plant sterols can't be used like our cholesterol can. So we don't get as much hormones. We can't make vitamin D. It gets into our cell membranes because, again, our cell membranes are made out of cholesterol. So the lipid bilayer is cholesterol. That is the lipid bilayer. And plant sterols get in there. They're stiff and rigid, and they're just not as functional, right? And so our red blood cells die earlier because they're stiff and rigid and can't fold around in these little capillaries as well. So, there are a lot of reasons why cholesterol is very good for you, and you can damage cholesterol. First of all, there's over 100 different kinds of LDL cholesterol. Just saying LDL isn't really helpful. You make large, buoyant LDL molecules. Why would we make something that would damage us? Okay, well, then you have glycation. You have, when your blood sugar goes up past a certain point, then you start glycating things. You can glycate your LDL, and you can get damaged small, dense lipoproteins, SDLDL, and they can knock off the ApoB. So people go, oh my God, ApoB. Okay, well, that's only getting knocked off because you're glycating them or drinking alcohol or having seed oils and linoleic acid. Those are damaging the ApoB 100, which is a signaling molecule on LDL normally. And that's what your liver recognizes to pull that in. And if you damage that, okay, but that's not the cholesterol's fault. You're doing something to it. And let's say the SDLDL is now damaged. Maybe that's involved in heart disease, but that's not causing it. That wouldn't exist if you weren't glycating it, if you didn't have high blood sugar, if you didn't have seed oils, if you didn't have alcohol or other sorts of substances in your body causing damage to it. So, but then you have to look at the statin and say, okay, well, let's say you have a ton of SDLDL, like all this ApoB. Oh my gosh. Okay. What does the statin do? Does the statin clear all that up? No. It stops your body from making the large, buoyant LDL molecules in the first place. So now you actually have less of the ones you want and a disproportionate amount of the ones you don't want. And it can get in your brain, and it can slow down the processes of cholesterol metabolism. So that's not great. Okay, but does it help people? Well, it can help some people. If you look at the data from the drug companies that make statins, and like we know, these people are just out for themselves. And one thing you can safely say of any study that's paid for by a certain industry, is it going to support that industry, or they just won't publish it? So, or they're going to design it and manipulate it to favor the industry and the product, or they just won't publish it. So if you look at their data, which is the best statins are ever going to look, if you look at their data, what they found is if people have had a heart attack, had this event you're talking about, and they go on statins every single day for the rest of their life, at least 5 years, it will extend their life. On average, 5 days. Days. Not weeks, months, or years. 5 days. And if they have not had a heart attack, it does not extend life. That's what statins do for you.
If you have not had a heart attack, it won't extend your life. So if you just had angina, for example, it will not extend your life.
According to their data. Yeah. And the thought from people even that still support, some of the people that still support statins, but they don't think that it's actually from the cholesterol lowering portion of it. They think that it's actually from an anti-inflammatory effect it has, sort of like aspirin. Aspirin works just fine. It actually works better than that. So, why wouldn't you just use that instead? And why does aspirin help prevent heart attacks and strokes? It's because it's preventing clotting. It's preventing clotting from being so dramatic. So that's really what's going on. You have clotting dysfunction in your body. You're getting damage to your arteries, and that's causing a clot. And then you get bigger and clots and scarring, clot and scarring, clot damage and scarring. And then you start closing down and narrowing these gaps. It's not just cholesterol, it's just stuffing itself in there. First of all, it can't. If people understand cellular physiology, cholesterol molecules can't get in between and behind these cells. Even the smaller, dense LDL particles, they can't fit through those tight junctions, those little tight gap junctions between the cells. They cannot. So the only way that they would get in behind there in the first place is if there was damage, if that lining was broken, torn, pulled apart. So the origin of this disease is from damage. You're getting damaged. So it doesn't matter about anything else. What matters is damage. You're damaging your artery lining. And that can happen from oxidative stress. That can happen from omega-3s. That can happen from glycation. That can happen from all these different sorts of noxious chemicals that we're putting in our body. Nicotine is known to damage the lining of our arteries. This is why there's such a strong correlation between smoking and nicotine use, even the patch, even the gum, and development of atherosclerotic disease. So, so it may or may, if you've had a heart attack, it may help 5 days. So some people it's sort of providing some sort of benefit, but I mean, it's not from lowering the LDL cholesterol. Think about it this way: if you just stop eating for 5 days, it's not a matter of eating fat and cholesterol. You make cholesterol. Dietary cholesterol has been roundly shown to really not affect your serum cholesterol whatsoever, or saturated fat. And so, I mean, people were given experiments with eggs. They were given like 36 eggs a day for weeks, and it did not change their serum cholesterol, because your body makes cholesterol and it absorbs the little bits of cholesterol that it needs to fill in the gaps. But it normally just makes a lot of cholesterol. And so, again, why would it make an inordinate amount unnecessarily? When you just stop eating everything, fat included, your LDL goes up. It can go up a lot. So people go on a ketogenic diet, they go on a carnivore diet, it's a high-fat, meat-based diet, their cholesterol goes up, and oh my God, all that saturated fat. No. Because if you just stop eating altogether and you don't eat any of the meat, your LDL will go up by the same margin. Why is that? It's a metabolic state change. Remember, when our insulin comes down, we are in an entirely different physiological state. We're in an entirely different metabolic state. And now we're running on our fat stores. Instead of running on the glucose and the sugar that we're eating, we are running on our fat stores. So, we eat food, we store it in the tank, and now we're running on the tank. And how do you use that energy? Well, you have to mobilize it, and you have to bring it to the liver, and then the liver makes blood sugar, glycogen, and ketones. Okay, but how does it get to the fat to the liver? Because it can't go through your bloodstream, because fat and water repel each other. So you have to actually carry it in special carrier molecules, cholesterol, right? So these are carrier proteins, they're carrier molecules. LDL cholesterol is a carrier molecule for fat, and it carries that fat from your adipose tissue to your liver. And so if you stop eating at all, if you just stop eating carbohydrates, regardless of the fat you eat, regardless of the protein you eat, if you just stop eating carbohydrates and your insulin comes down, then you have to start, if you're eating carbs, and you're just going to run on those carbs because you're just trying to get them down, actually. But when you stop eating carbs, then your liver makes carbs and glycogen and ketones, and that comes from your fat store. So it's a simple metabolic change. You're running on fat now, you have to transport fat around the body, and that's LDL's job. Why would that be a thing? Why would that be something that's harmful to us? Why would that be something that would damage us? Doesn't make any sense. That's a normal physiological state. Is fasting bad for you? Is that bad for your heart? No. In fact, studies show that people that traditionally fast and fast more often or fast religiously have much lower rates of chronic disease like heart disease. So no, fasting is beneficial. There's thousands of studies showing that fasting is beneficial, even though it raises your LDL cholesterol. So why are we still worried about LDL cholesterol? I think that it's something that is just a scapegoat. We know it was a scapegoat by the sugar companies. We know that it was never the cause in the first place. And that should have been it. Once that was proven and we had their documents, that should have been the end of the story. But unfortunately, there are trillions of dollars at risk here because in America, we spend $1 trillion a year just treating type 2 diabetes. Only 9% of Americans are diabetic. And we spend $1 trillion a year treating them. Robert Lustig estimates that in America, we spend $2.4 trillion a year just treating the effects of fructose consumption, just fructose, right? And, and we spend I think the sugar companies make about $1.3 trillion a year selling their drugs, right? So there's massive, massive, massive vested interests here, keeping this status quo. And the statins have been the most lucrative drug ever put on the market. And we're going to pry that out of their cold, dead hands, and they're trying to get this younger and younger and younger and younger be required or recommended. And that's just going to massively increase their profitability. So they're never going to admit that cholesterol wasn't the problem, but we have hard evidence of that. So I think the thing to do is just say, look, this is done. This case closed. This is not up for debate anymore. This is a matter of record. I'm not talking about cholesterol anymore. Cholesterol is good for you. We're not talking about this anymore. Let's move on to more fruitful ground because this is just a waste of time. We're just spinning our wheels. We're talking the idea of cholesterol being a problem versus sugar or other processed foods in the context of heart disease. This has been hotly debated since the 50s. There are papers in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, back in 1956 that I was reading, talking about how they said, well, basically in the medical community, it's been largely accepted that cholesterol causes heart disease. However, this is based on really faulty premise and really bad studies and really poorly designed studies and really bad evidence. And he just went through all of these things and just absolutely eviscerated all the current data at the time that implicated cholesterol. And now we know that it wasn't even wrong. It wasn't false. It was fraudulent. They knowingly falsified this data and published these fraudulent studies to implicate cholesterol when it was more likely to be sugar. There's a strong correlation between sugar and seed oils throughout the 20th century. There was no correlation between meat and saturated fat, none. We started increasing meat since the 1920s and 30s. However, the entire 120 years before that, we were eating far more meat and there was no heart disease to speak of at all. So there's no correlation there. Saturated fat has basically been flatlined throughout the 20th century and the early 21st century, has not gone up, and yet heart disease rates are going up. Then dishonest actors will try to trick you into misunderstanding the situation by saying that in the 1960s and 70s, cardiovascular disease death mortality rates peaked and then started to come down. And so that perfectly aligns up with reducing saturated fat, reducing meat, putting in statins and all this sort of stuff. But that's not what we said. We said the rate of heart disease is going up, and it is. The prevalence is going up. The percentage of people in the population who have atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease is going up decade after decade. The incidence, the number of new diagnosed people with cardiovascular disease is going up. The number of new heart attacks every year is going up, but they're surviving. Why is that? One, we reduced smoking significantly since the 1970s. But most importantly is that our interventions got better. Our ambulances systems got better. We're able to get people in from remote areas. We're able to get them into a tertiary center, get them into a cath lab, put a stent in them, take that clot out, remove the stroke. We're able to fly them in. Someone's in rural northern Canada, you can helicopter them in to Toronto, or you can fly them in on a private jet. Here in Australia, there's something called the Royal Flying Doctors. It's private jet service where an ER doctor and a group of nurses will fly out to the middle of nowhere, on a Lear jet, all suited up like a an ambulance, get someone in there that can stabilize them, bring them down, and get them emergency care right away. Otherwise, they were all dead. If you didn't live in a city in close proximity to a center that had a cath lab or a cardiothoracic surgeon, you had a heart attack, you're dead. So all of those things have improved. And so our survival has improved. Also, we're catching these things earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier because people are getting younger and younger and younger when they're developing this stuff. And they're having stress tests and echoes and all that sort of stuff. So the rate of disease is going up. The rate of disease should be coming down if we remove, if statins are so good, if they're reducing cholesterol, and that's the only important thing, then the rates, the prevalence, the incidence should start going down as well. But they're not. They're going up, and they're going up around the world. The mortality rate is going up around the world. It's just in Western countries where we have better institution, we have better infrastructure for our medical systems. There, the mortality rate has started to come down. But in other parts of the world, they don't have that infrastructure. The mortality rate is going up. I heard a very frightening statistics. I haven't been able to verify this, but it was something that another researcher told me, which was scary, was that 1 in 4 men in India will die of a heart attack. That's insane. You look at census data, what people were dying of in the 1800s, it was not heart attacks. Even in the early 1900s, it wasn't heart attacks. So this is on the rise. And you look at the number of cardiovascular deaths around the world, it is going up decade after decade after decade. And it is going up faster than the rate of population growth. I looked at it, and it's going up at a faster percentage than the population growth. So, that's, you have the baby boomers getting older and things like that. So maybe that's influencing things, but that's just in America and Europe and things like that. This is not talking about India and China and all that sort of stuff. So this is a world phenomenon, and it's only getting worse. It is not getting better. If cholesterol were the answer, we would have seen a very different story. This would all be coming down. It is not. It is only going up. So I just say, look, this is a matter of record. It was a con. It was a fraud then, and it is now. And just we're not going to talk about this. This isn't a thing anymore. We're going to move on. It's metabolic disease. We're not talking about that.
I'm just thinking, a person in this situation, they're leaving the doctor with this list of things to take. If that person is willing to do red meat, salt water, are they doing both? Are they like, I'm just wondering, is the statin harming, or should they just do both?
I think that
and sorry, just one question. And forever? That's the other part of the question. And is it forever?
Is the red meat forever, or is the statin forever?
Medication.
Well, I mean, the drug companies definitely want it to be forever. Yeah. And they would say that. Yeah. And they say, you just have to take statins for the rest of your life. That's just a thing.
And aspirin, and like there's a list that they get, right?
Yeah, exactly. But, certainly, statins, they just say, no, you just have to do this. It's just a constant fight against LDL. Our body's just trying to kill us with this LDL, and we just have to fight it with these medications that have never existed before the past century. And so obviously, we were just couldn't live. I mean, it's a surprise that we've made it this far, if, with all the statin deficiencies that we've been suffering from this whole time. The thing is that, everybody is in an individual place, and it's hard to give sort of, specific medical advice to people that I'm, that I'm not seeing. But, I just go by the data. The drug company's own data shows that if you haven't had a heart attack, this will not extend your life. If you have had a heart attack, it will extend your life by 5 days if you take it every single day for the rest of your life, and for at least 5 years. It can cause harm. It lowers LDL cholesterol. You need LDL cholesterol. This is non-negotiable. And your brain needs cholesterol. Your brain needs these structures and the ability to mobilize fat. And your body needs the ability to mobilize fat. And so I do think of that as a harm, because I don't consider LDL a problem, because it never was. It's never been shown to be a problem. All the studies that showed some sort of weak correlation, they were fraudulent. And we know that now. We have hard evidence of that. That's in the peer-reviewed literature now. Even the Framingham study that I was taught in medical school to show this strong correlation between increased cholesterol levels and cardiovascular death, mortality rates. That didn't actually show that. That was misrepresented by the American Heart Association. And so, the American Heart Association says this. I couldn't care less. These people have been corrupted since day one. And they lied and said that the Framingham study showed increased cholesterol, increased cardiovascular death. In fact, the Framingham study showed the opposite. If you lowered your total cholesterol, that increased cardiovascular death. So no, I don't think it's a good idea. In fact, those studies have shown that if you lower your cholesterol, your mortality goes up. In fact, there are studies with patients, one study with 11 million patients, other ones with 60,000 patients, 200,000 patients, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of patients, showing that higher LDL cholesterol, lower risk of all-cause mortality, or lower rates of all-cause mortality. So this is associated with longevity, not with death. And there was a study just out of Sweden last year with 44,000 patients. Again, a big study. And they looked at different biomarkers that would help predict living over 100. And they found that the two best biomarkers for living over 100 was low fasting insulin. So again, that's a good sign of metabolic health. You want that low insulin so your body can work normally. And then high total cholesterol. So there it is again. Why do we want to lower cholesterol when it's beneficial, when we make it for a good reason? So I don't think it's a good idea. I think it does cause harm simply because you're stopping your body from making something. I mean, it's like if you were taking, if you just said for some reason, well, some people that have testosterone that's too high, that can be a problem for certain reasons. So I'm just going to take testosterone blockers. Well, you're just stopping your body from making a physiological amount of testosterone. You don't have a problem. It's not too high. You don't have the disease. And you're just saying, no, I'm going to stuff it down, because eventually 50 years later, 60 years later, I might develop, benign prostatic hypertrophy. It's like, well, you could do that, but the thing is that testosterone has other uses in your body than just growing your prostate. So, you're losing out on those physiological mechanisms. And so, and it has other effects too. It does other things in your body. So, if I don't think it's a good idea to lower your cholesterol, I think it's a bad idea. I certainly don't think you need to do that if you're eating a natural diet, if you're eating a biologically appropriate diet. Then your LDL is going to be physiological. It's going to be what it's supposed to be. Well, what about familial hypercholesterolemia? People that make way too much LDL. Well, who says it's too much? That's a value judgment. Someone had just said that's too much. This is fine, and that's too much. Well, according to who? According to why? According to what data? Because this doesn't actually cause harm. Oh, well, LDL goes up in these people, and heart disease goes up. No, not necessarily. It's nuanced, because people with familial hypercholesterolemia, they have very high LDL, but they also have a higher percentage risk of developing clotting disorders. And again, it's going back to clotting. And so when studies were looked at separating out those two populations, and the populations that just had high LDL cholesterol versus the ones who had high LDL cholesterol and the clotting disorder, it was only the ones with the clotting disorder that had higher rates of cardiovascular disease and death. The ones that just had the high, according to them, mega high, way too high LDL cholesterol, that these people had the exact same risk of developing heart disease as the rest of the population. So it's not the cholesterol. It's other things, damage to their body, disordered clotting, things like that. So I don't think it's a great idea to lower cholesterol. If your body's making cholesterol and you're eating a physiologically appropriate, biologically appropriate diet, then your cholesterol should be at an appropriate level for your body at that time. And I think you just leave it alone. And the drugs do cause harm. Of course, they have side effects. There was a doctor who said to me once, drugs don't have side effects. They just have effects. And some of them you want and some of them you don't. These are just effects that they have. And so, of course, these things have effects in your body, and some of them you don't want. And in fact, the ones that people say we do want, which is lowering the cholesterol, that's one I don't want. I certainly am not going to take a statin for myself. For other people, they need to talk to their doctors for their particular situation, but they need to know the facts so they can make an informed decision. And they need to understand exactly what statins can do for them. Most doctors won't understand that. Most doctors don't know the literature on this, because most medical school programs are written, the curriculum is generally written by either the drug companies or people who work for them, professors that are on the payroll of these drug companies. Harvard was found to be extremely caught up in corporate capture. Like, they just, all these guys were bought and paid for. They were one of the worst medical schools in the country for this. They had because you're a professor of medicine at Harvard. That's who you want to bribe to pay off to push your wares, because, oh my God, we have these guys from Harvard there. Obviously, it's going to be very reputable if you have these guys on your payroll. So they were very much corrupted by this stuff. So we as doctors, we get trained basically by the drug companies. Then we go through residency that's largely dictated by the drug companies, where here's a problem, here's a pill, and the drug companies tell us which pill to use in different times. Oh, we have this new study out, and here's the new data, and this is what we should use now. Here's a new pill, here's a new pill, here's a new pill. And then our continuing medical education should come from lectures and things like that, all funded by the big pharma companies and the big food companies. But really, the most education you're getting is Tuesday afternoon when you have a catered lunch by a drug rep who's just telling you the new drug. And, oh, here's the study and here's the data and here's the grade. It's like, oh, great. Oh, that's great. They don't actually look at these things. They don't, because people are busy. Doctors are busy, but it is your responsibility to keep on top of the literature. There's a famous address to the medical school at a graduating class of Harvard medicine back in the 30s. And they said, half of what you learned here in medical school at Harvard is going to turn out to be wrong, but no one's going to tell you which half. You need to figure that out. You need to experiment. You need to use your head, and you need to look at the data and the literature and publish your own literature to figure out which half. And people just ignore that. I learned that in medical school, therefore it's true. Of course it's not. If you look at the origins of most of these things, it's based on very tenuous evidence at best, and sometimes just flat out fraud, such as cholesterol. So for me, again, I don't think we should be talking about cholesterol. And so I don't think we should be talking about lowering cholesterol. And I don't think we should be talking about putting people on statins or other sorts of medications, because cholesterol was never the problem. It was never the issue. It never caused heart disease. It never damn well will. And so I don't think that we should ever worry about it in that sense. I don't think we should put people on these medications, because it's a red herring. And they're continuing to use it as a red herring and change the goalposts and say, oh, but ApoB, oh, but this, oh, but that. No, it was never a problem. There's never an association. It's over. And so, for me personally, I don't think that statins are a good idea. And yes, I do think that they can cause harm.
Going back to, if we're eating the appropriate diet, red meat, salt water. Now, I have a hiccup in my head because I've heard so many different people saying that, oh, well, if you want to lose weight, you want to eat a lot of protein. And so this high protein diet that people talk about. But then on the flip side, I'll hear people saying, if you eat a lot of protein, you're going to get kicked out of ketosis because, so there's a question mark in my mind, like, what's the right amount of protein? And just to give you the reason that this is even coming to me is I went away on vacation, and on vacation, didn't have my access to what I normally eat. So I ended up having 2 meals in the day rather than one. And it was basically 2 meat heavy meals because everything else they had there wasn't anything. So I had more protein than usual. Just, coincidentally, eggs and sausage and all kinds of stuff, and meat for supper. That's what I had. I came back 5 pounds lighter, and I was confused because I ate more, lost weight. So I'm looking at this question, does protein kick you out of ketosis? Like, because how could I have lost weight if I was out of ketosis? I'm not sure. This is the question I'm throwing over to you because I've heard both sides of this argument argued over and over again, and I'm not sure what explains what happened to me.
Well, it could be a lot of things, but whether eating protein kicks you out of ketosis or not, if you're eating actual meat, if you're eating just whole meat, like our ancestors would, like you went hunting and you're just eating your kill, whether it kicks you out of ketosis or not, it doesn't matter. That's physiological. It's what's supposed to happen. The point is not ketosis, not ketosis. The point is meat, not meat. What are we designed to eat, right? A lion doesn't give a crap if it's in ketosis or not. It's just eating gazelle, right? So it eats gazelle, and whatever happens after you eat a gazelle is supposed to happen. Same for us. Now, you're overdoing it. If you're just taking massive amounts of protein shakes and just super lean and things like that, okay, well, maybe you're doing something that your body's it's not quite right. But we do need fat. That's what you alluded to at the beginning of this, which was, we have 5 organs working in concert simply to absorb fat. Your stomach starts breaking down the food. Your liver makes bile. Your gallbladder stores it to then be released and emulsify the fat. Your pancreas produces lipase and other digestive enzymes that break it down, and then your small intestine absorbs it. So you have 5 organs all working together. If one of those breaks down in the chain, you're not going to have as much of you're going to have a harder time absorbing fat. If you don't have bile, you can't absorb fat. If your pancreas isn't making lipase, you're not going to break it down and be able to emulsify it. If you're having digestive issues, you have celiac or something like that, and you're going to have absorption issues, you're not going to absorb it, right? So all those things need to work well to get the amount of fat that you need. So that's, again, a physiological amount of fat that we need. We make a certain amount of bile. I don't think that's a mistake. Our body is making a specific amount of bile because it wants a specific amount of fat in return. And that's why when you don't get all that fat, it stores in your gallbladder, and it can store there for weeks and can actually get more and more concentrated if you're getting small amounts of fat. And physiology textbooks will tell you it can get up to 20 times more concentrated. Potentially other people can concentrate even more. Maybe these are the ones that predispose to getting gallstones, because what happens to any hyper-concentrated solution at rest? Forms crystals, precipitate. That's what gall sludge is, and that's what gallstones are. Bile sludge and gallstones are, right? And the thing is if you're eating enough fat, as in you're eating as much fat as your body is making bile for, you physically cannot form gallstones. You can't, because bile won't be there long enough to form a stone. And so, that's the thing. And so I don't think you need to starve yourself of fat. You're going to be storing that in your gallbladder, and eventually that's going to cause problems. You need to get that fat. And if an animal, like a predator like us, may not get a kill every day, and so maybe we would go a week or 2 and then we get a kill, and we'd have to really absorb all that fat. And that's why we need that really concentrated, so we can get all that in there. So the thing is that you need enough fat, you need enough protein. And I think that's the important key there, is and I don't worry about it after that. So I go by taste. If something tastes, if the meat tastes good, then my body's asking for it. Other things can taste good. Things are designed to be highly palatable. We have food scientists making sure that things taste good long after you're stuffed and full. And that's by design. That's to sell a product. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about our natural designed food. Why is it that a lion knows when to stop eating? Why does a koala know when to stop eating? Why does a cow know when to stop eating? Something in them tells them. Well, what I've noticed is that it's taste. And when the more hungry we are, the better that fatty meat tastes, or the lean meat. But lean meat starts tasting not that great pretty quickly, unless you have fat with it. And so I don't think you need to count calories. I don't think you need to count macros, because your body does it for you. And calories, again, it's not a great metric, but I don't think you need to count the macros and micros that you're eating, because your body does that for you. Our stomach has receptors that track up to your brain and actually tells your brain how much macros and micros are there. This is why the notion in the 80s that you could just eat a whole bunch of fiber and have no nutrients and no energy in it, and then but it would fill up your stomach because it was full of fiber, and you trick your body into thinking it's full, never worked. People just got bloated, sick, and they're still hungry. And that can cause disordered eating. And that's because your stomach knew that there weren't any nutrients in there. It was just full. But that doesn't mean anything. You could eat a bunch of styrofoam too. It's not going to do much. And so, you don't need to count these things. You just eat until it stops tasting good. And so that's the thing. So if you play around with things and just eat super, super lean, maybe something's happening. Maybe you're going to raise your insulin a little bit, but you know what? You'll go right out of it pretty quickly. And I don't worry too much about it. So if I eat like a big steak, if I eat like 2 pounds of beef, I may dip out of ketosis and I may come back in. But so is a lion. They're going to too. And so I don't worry about it. That's physiological. If that's what happens, then that is what is supposed to happen, because I am supposed to eat meat. Our ancestors have been eating meat for millions of years. So I go back to first principles. What am I supposed to eat? What is my body adapted for? We can go into the weeds and look at the different biochemical processes and all that sort of stuff. And it's very interesting. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, what are we designed to eat? Well, we eat what we're designed to eat. Our body's going to work the way it's designed to work. And so if we pop out of ketosis, fine. You're not going to stay out of ketosis. Even eating a lot more protein, like you might come out of ketosis temporarily, but you'll go back into it. It's not that big of a deal. The thing is, too, you need to remember is that if you're under eating chronically, you actually slow your metabolism. Now, you can eat less than you need and you can lose weight. We can all starve ourselves smaller, but that plateaus. And that's because our metabolism slows down. There was the Minnesota starvation study in the during World War II. And they just basically starved the hell out of these people just to see what would happen. And again, they lost a whole bunch of weight, but it sort of plateaued. And they weren't eating enough. If the whole calories in, calories out model were true, these people would have lost more weight than they started with. And so they would have died, right? They would have ceased to exist, but they didn't, right? And so they all survived. And that's because their metabolism slowed down. And it's just less is coming in, less is going out. That's all there is to it. They're very fiscally responsible. Cut your hours at work. Last thing you want to do is start spending your savings account and blowing the credit cards out, right? You need to trim sales and survive. And that's what our body does, is very fiscally responsible. And so you keep your metabolism low. So you lose some weight initially, but then it sort of plateaus. And then if you start eating normally again, you will put on weight, because your body says, okay, we need to store that. We need to put that in the bank. We need to replenish the bank account, right? And so this is why sometimes when people eat more, it actually stimulates their metabolism. And so they're eating more. They're eating until their body says that's enough, until it stops tasting good. That's why I always tell people, eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. You never have to force feed yourself. You never have to go past that. But if meat still tastes good, you should keep eating it. If you're only eating meat, if you're eating carbohydrates, that'll raise your insulin, that'll block your leptin, that'll raise your ghrelin, that will make you think you're starving when you're not, and you will overeat. But if you're not doing that, then you can listen to your body's signals. So as long as meat tastes good, fatty meat tastes good, keep going until it stops. And what that does is it encourages your metabolism. It brings up your metabolism. It tells your body that you're not in a famine. We're not, it's not like there's this separate entity in our body that we can talk to, say, hey, I want to lose weight this weekend. Like, yeah, sure, no problem. It's just taking physiological, biological signals. And, what animal in nature, when hungry, is not going to eat if there's food available? Of course it's going to eat. And so what that signal is if your body's saying you need to eat, we're hungry, and you don't eat, what you're telling your body is there is nothing to eat. You're in a famine. You can't get a kill. And so your body says, right, shut it down. And you're going to lower your metabolism. So we want to raise your metabolism. We don't want to be in a famine. And when you eat more, to the point, not to excess, you can force feed yourself, but it's actually very difficult to overeat on a carnivore diet, because it just stops tasting good. And you're just like, oh my God, I don't want to do it anymore. And so you just naturally stop, and that encourages your metabolism. And that can indeed actually help cause you to lose weight, seemingly paradoxically, but it's a simple metabolic state. Your metabolism is coming up, and your body says, we don't need to keep the savings account. We can drain it. That's fine.
And even though it was only 1 week, so the part that kind of shocked me, 1 week, although it was a hot climate, so I'll give it that. But 1 week hot climate, and even though I would say that the only place that I know there was carbs was in the eggs, because there was always scrambled eggs, and I know they put stuff in there. But so there were some carbs coming in, but that's enough to speed up my metabolism that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow,
definitely. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So, I mean, we see this sometimes in sort of carnivore community. Now, I did like a ketogenic diet just because I wasn't like doing keto, but I just noticed that when I had anything with carbohydrates or grains, my back hurt more. And so I thought, no, I don't want that. And so I had anything. It was just like, okay, that tasted good, but now my back's hurt for the last 2 days. And so I'm not going to eat that stuff. And so I was just eating vegetables and lean meat and not all that much meat and a lot of vegetables. And I wasn't losing weight. I wasn't feeling great. And I just stopped eating the vegetables. And when I realized, like, hold on a second, no, humans really are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal we are. And plants are toxic. They have defense chemicals. We're not designed to eat these stupid things. So I said, right, get rid of it. Get rid of these stupid things. And I just started eating a lot of meat and a lot of fatty meat. So I increased the poundage significantly. I was probably eating maybe half a pound of lean sirloin steak. And I switched to about 2.5 pounds, 2 pounds of ribeye, fatty ribeye, didn't cut any of the fat off, and dropped the nasty greens. And what happened? I lost 23 pounds in 10 days, right? Like that. I wasn't shifting any weight before that. I was just staying the same, even though I was basically starving myself. I was hungry all the time. The vegetables tasted disgusting. I mean, I wasn't putting any salad dressing or anything on it. It was just bitter, miserable filth, right? And while some things can taste good because they're designed to taste good, if it's something tastes bad, if it's bitter, you can pretty much take it to the bank that is bad for you. There's harmful chemicals in there your brain is warning you against. In fact, there's a book that my mom got me for Christmas called The Most Delicious Poison, which it's about spices. And it's about how all these spices and seasonings that we use and we've used historically, we're actually tasting the most toxic chemicals in that plant. And that's why I have such a strong flavor, because our brain is warning us, going, dear God, don't eat that. Spit it out. So you have this visceral response. You put it in your mouth, you go, oh, no, no, no. And you spit it out. And that's why kids will spit out vegetables, because they're disgusting. Why would we have evolved to hate the taste of something that was good for us? That doesn't make any sense. Now, there are outliers on things that do taste good, but if something tastes bad, it's bad. And so I was drinking this. I was blending it with water and just drinking down just whole things of miserable, spinach, kale, broccoli. They're supposed to be all the best ones, right? And so those are the ones I was doing. It tasted disgusting, and I didn't feel good. I couldn't lose weight. I felt I was 38, so I'm like, okay, well, look, I'm middle aged. This is going to take longer, and so that wasn't the case. As soon as I stopped the greens and I started massively increasing my meat, I lost 23 pounds in 10 days. And that's a conservative estimate, because my weight would sort of go up and down just based on my water weight. And then I dropped down to 243 pounds. I sort of estimated I was sort of at 266, but at some points I was over 270, just sort of depending on the day, my water weight would go up and down. And then I was 243 pounds on the nose for 6 months, but my body was completely transformed. And all those people that said you can't lose fat and put on muscle at the same time, ridiculous, because like I was losing no weight, but I was shredding fat and stacking on muscle, and I ended up at 6% body fat at 38, and and very muscular. I weighed the exact same amount that whole time, so I was perfectly replacing out the fat I was losing with the muscle that I was gaining, and that was going to be metabolic. But that was also going to be getting rid of these chemicals that were in the plants as well. They have lectins. Lectins are a defense chemical that's in every plant, and some of these things can bind to the insulin receptors 5 times more tightly than insulin, and cause a stronger insulin-like effect, and can bind to leptin as well, and again cause you to overeat and all the rest of it, and store fat, because again, insulin is the fat storage hormone. So you just get rid of these things, you encourage your metabolism, and your body just works in amazing ways. And after a few weeks, you get most of these nasty, filthy chemicals out of your body, and you feel better than you ever have in your entire life. 2 weeks into this, I felt like I did when I was 22 playing professional rugby, doing a carnivore diet, because I defaulted into it because I learned how toxic plants were, taking biology and cancer biology and botany. And so I said, right, I'm just never eating plants again. And I've never felt better in my entire life until right now. And then just sort of 2 weeks into this, all of a sudden I felt like I did when I was 22. And I'd always been trying to get back to that 20 to 25 range because I just felt like a superhero the whole time. And I never did after that. At 25, it ended. And at 25, I'm thinking, 3 months ago, I felt like a superhero. Why don't I feel that good now? And I could never get back to it.
Was that because you reintroduced veg at that point?
Yeah. So I sort of started slipping things back in. And I never ate processed foods or anything like that. But, I was in England. I was playing rugby over there. And I just didn't have the same access to meat that I did in the U.S. And so, some of the meat was breaded, it was like crumbing, like panko crumbing. And I was like, oh, is it that big of a deal? Dose makes the poison. It's another vegan excuse. Well, yes, there are all these poisons in plants, but no, dose makes the poison. Yeah, the dose is really small, just like with glucose, 1 extra gram of glucose, and you're in a toxic state. So just the panko breading on these chicken legs a couple times a week, I wasn't eating it every day. That was enough to kick me out of this superhuman mode. And so when I looked back on my life and realized that's what I was doing, I was living, humans are carnivores, and I was living as a carnivore. I was eating as a carnivore for those 5 years that I've never felt better in my entire life. And right, knew it. I knew plants are toxic, get rid of these stupid things. And I just changed that. And within 2 weeks, I felt like I did when I was 22. I felt like a different breed of human. And I look back on my life apart from those 5 years and right that second, and I realized I'd felt like crap my entire life. And I was furious because I shouldn't have felt like that. And no one listening today should have felt like that or should feel like that. That is because you are being poisoned from your food, some worse than others. But you are being poisoned from your food. If you are eating anything except meat and water, fatty meat and water, you are being poisoned by your food. And you are feeling the effects of that. But because you've always been eating that and you've always had this low-grade poison, you don't realize it. And until you go 30 days, 60 days, 90 days without eating anything else except fatty meat and water, you won't even know. You won't even have that contrast. You won't be able to see how much better you can feel. And I have spoken to thousands of people at this point and hundreds of thousands of comments in all my videos. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen that repeated pattern of people saying, I didn't realize how sick I was until I stopped eating this way. I didn't realize how much better I could feel. I was almost dying, and now I feel like a superhero. It's crazy the difference that it makes. And it's all of our birthrights. The natural state of humanity is one of health. And now 93% of Americans have at least one metabolic disease. And 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. And the rest of the world is pretty damn similar. So the obesity rate 100 years ago in America was 1.3%. Now it's 42%. In 1980, it was 8%. After World War II, it was 6%. Went from 8% to 42% in the last 40 years. And so we have been robbed our birthright of good health. Not even great health, not even amazing, just good health. We should all be healthy. That is the natural state. We should not have these chronic diseases. We should not have these problems. We should not have to be on this medication. Medication is great when and where it's applicable, but we are just treating chronic diseases now. About 90% of what doctors treat now are these so-called chronic diseases, which I don't think are diseases at all. I think they're toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species-specific nutrition, namely plants, too many plants that we're not designed to eat and we don't have the metabolic capacity to contend with, and not enough fatty meat that has all the essential nutrients and macro and micronutrients that we have to have for optimal health. And we are suffering as a result of that. And no one should have to suffer for that. Everyone should at least know what is there for them. And if they choose to go another way, that is their business. And I have no problem with that. I have no problem with people smoke. I have no problem with people drink. I just don't want them to drink and smoke because doctors and drug and food companies are telling them it's really important that you smoke for your health. And that's what they're doing with this processed plant crap and vegetables and fruits, just plant foods that we've never eaten in any abundance at any point in history except for the last few thousand years. And we've had serious health ramifications because of that. That bothers me. And so if people want to eat these things for pleasure or just for masochism, or whatever their choice is, that's fine. But, I want people to at least understand that there is a better way of doing this. And there is a way that they can be healthy without doctors, without medications, without pills and supplements and tinctures and crystals and, energy readings. You don't need this stuff. You just put real food for humans in your body and you will be healthier than you've ever been in your entire life. Guaranteed. Food is species specific. And if you eat, if any species eats outside of its species specific diet, it will get sick for the reasons that I've mentioned already. The same rules apply to us, and we need to recognize that. This is why there are signs at the zoo that say, don't feed the animals. It makes them very sick if they don't eat a special diet. We need that sign on our refrigerators.
I think you're helping me to understand something because I've been trying to figure out why my midsection, I just can't get it, that last bit of fat off. And you said your mom gave you that book and it was talking about spices, and it clicked in my head as soon as you said that. I still spice my food. And the other piece of the puzzle is I still eat avocado once in a while. And so that whole idea, like the dose makes the poison, as you said earlier, it's like when I figured out that I have a problem with nightshades, because I happen to have a problem with nightshades, and you do the research and it says, oh, nightshades, the solanine is not enough but somehow I'm reacting. And maybe what you're helping me to see right now is these little things that I've still left in my diet because it doesn't reach my carb threshold, but it might not be the carb threshold now that my body is letting me see. So every time we improve, our body shows us something else. And then we improve some more and our body shows us something else. And maybe that's the stage I'm at where my body is showing me, hey, these spices, maybe take a look at that. And it was not something that was on my radar at all. So I'm just so happy that you just said that.
Yeah, well, it's funny, I say this a lot, but I think it's really true that getting rid of the last 5% of, the last vestiges of plants and inappropriate foods makes about 95% of the difference. And it's massive, that difference at the end. Now, we're all at different stages. Some people, from years and decades of damage to their body, it may not be possible to go back and get like the perfect body again. But you can certainly get it as good as it will ever be at this stage in your life. And and getting rid of all those last little things can absolutely help as well. I had a lady, very nice lady. She was Canadian. She was Inuit descent, and she had, culturally they just eat a lot of meat anyway, and they hunt a lot. And she was very involved in her community there, and she had been doing a carnivore diet for 40 years. She was in her late 50s, but she looked like she was 30, and she was very healthy, very young looking. But she had a daughter that had just every food sensitivity in the book, which again, these people historically had not had agriculture. And so it's very recently they're introduced to that. So obviously they're going to be much more sensitive to this than people from other ethnic backgrounds that may have had agriculture 10,000 years ago, right? So at least you had some time to adapt a bit, but everybody gets these diseases. It's just that some people get it faster than others, but we all get them. And so, the Inuit population, it's really only been the last 100 years or so that they've been really started being more incorporated into Western society or Western civilization and in eating in the Western sort of way and using plant foods. But either way, she hadn't been. She'd been carnivore for 40 years because her daughter was very sensitive to this stuff. So she's okay, well, we can't eat any of that. We're just going to eat meat. And well, we know we can eat meat because our people always eat meat. So we're just going to eat meat. So she was clued in there. Very healthy. Her and her daughter are very healthy. And then she sort of came across my stuff in carnivore. She's like, yeah, this makes sense. I know this because of, my ethnic origins, and I'm everybody who eats meat in my community, and that's all they eat. They're very healthy. But here's this thing he's talking about is that, getting rid of the last bits of plants that makes all this difference. And she said, how can that possibly be? Like it's just spices, just seasoning. And she used seasonings. And the thing is, she had 4 autoimmune diseases. She said she was on a carnivore diet, but she actually had 4, these autoimmune issues that she was dealing with. And she's just like, maybe it's the spice. Like, it can't be though. But she says, you know what? I'll give it a try. So she joined my 30-day challenge of just cutting out everything except meat and water, nothing else, no spices, anything, just salt. And she did it, and wouldn't you know, her autoimmune issues went away. And she was just like, this is crazy. I just did not realize it, but this is amazing. And it makes sense, that these toxins are damaging your body. And so just getting rid of those last little thing. Now, she was much more sensitive, right? Because of her ethnic background. But it's a demonstration that these things have toxins in them, and they do have deleterious effects in our body. And for her, it manifested as autoimmunity. And it could manifest another way. Also, you got to remember that avocados do have toxins in them. Like I said, they'd kill a cat, right? And so there is something in there, right, that will cause some sort of poison to something. But we need to remember that with fruit, yes, they want to move that seed. And so, yes, they want that fruit, the meat of the fruit, to be attractive to something, right? So it can be nutritious or tasty or whatever. But the problem is that when it's not ripe, the seed's not ready. And that's why it's not ripe. So the seed is getting ready, and then it will ripen once the seed is ready. So before that seed is ready, the plant does not want you to touch that thing. And that's why it's rock hard. It's stuck onto the vine or the tree. It's very hard to get off. It's really tightly bound there. And it doesn't taste as good, right? So there are far more toxins in the fruit at that time. So tomatoes are nightshades. They have a lot of solanine and other things. And they say, oh, but it's not enough to. How much is too much? They don't tell you. They say, okay, 4 regular tomatoes, that's when you get to be. They don't tell you. They don't tell you how much cyanide is an acceptable daily limit. And yet there's cyanide in almonds, and there's cyanide in cassava, and there's cyanide in tapioca. People are giving kids tapioca pudding. There's cyanide in it. And the WHO says, hey, you cannot have more than X amount of cyanide a day. But they don't tell you that, this many almonds will exceed that, right? And it actually is doable. It's not, you don't need thousands of these things. About 2 pounds of almonds can kill an adult because of the cyanide.
And so when you make nut flours, aren't you making that doable at that point?
Yeah, well, you're at least bringing those toxins in there, like cyanide. And cyanide is a mitochondrial toxin as well. It directly destroys and damages your mitochondria and stops the electron transport chain. So your mitochondria cannot function and make ATP. So it's toxic. You don't want any cyanide. It's, but a little bit. It's not that big a deal. Bullshit. Low-grade exposure to cyanide has been shown to cause neurological dysfunction, thyroid damage, and other organ damage as well. So, this is not something you want in your body. You certainly don't want to be giving it to your kids. But, you look at just, like the tomatoes, there are studies showing that because we always pick these things green, right? Because you can't pick them ripe, because we're not going to farmers markets. We're not buying it from our neighbor. We're getting these things shipped in from, Panama and Uruguay and wherever, and it's being shipped all over the world, so that in the dead of winter in Canada, you can have a mango or an avocado, right? And so that has to be picked at a state when it's green. So if it's picked when it's green, there's studies have shown this with tomatoes. If you pick tomatoes green, they will not detoxify, because it's the plant that pulls out the toxins. They don't just disintegrate in the tomato itself. The plant takes it out. And so even with avocados as well, they'll have, when they're green, they have 4 times the number of oxalates, which is one of the defense mechanisms, one of the defense chemicals, or groups of defense chemicals that plants make. And so you have far more oxalates. And so you pick that thing green, when was the last time you bought a ripe avocado at the grocery store? It just doesn't exist. I mean, these things are just green and rock hard, and you put them in your house and you just wait for them to ripen. And it's just like, and you try to wait and you're sort of getting it. It's mostly hard, but you just like, screw it. I want a bit of avocado. And then like, a little bit more, it's a little bit more ripe. And then all of a sudden, it's good for that day. And the next day, all the rest of them are bad. I mean, that's generally people's experiences with avocados. Either way, the toxins don't leave. They're still in there. And so you get a higher toxic load when you get this. Now, if you had an avocado tree at your house and you picked this, and this was seasonal and local, so it was only going to be for a couple of weeks out of the year, it was only going to be ripe, definitely better than the alternative. I still wouldn't eat it, but at least it's going to be a hell of a lot better than eating these things picked green that have a ton of sugar and a ton of toxins. And and you're eating them every single day all year round. That doesn't make any damn sense. We never would have done that. That again is not biologically appropriate to our species. So, if you are going to have these things, understand those principles, but really just, they have toxins. You don't need them. You don't want them. And you'd be better off without them, which is why I sort of encourage people to try just 30 days. Just try 30 days, just red meat and water, see how you go. And more often than not, people are very thankful that they did.
All medications come from plants, right? Like that's what's happening. We're taking plants and we're pulling out the things that do certain things to help us, apparently help us. We now have this this biohacking, like this world where people are just taking drugs to try, or drugs, like they're pulling out the best parts and giving it to themselves to try to be almost superhuman. But like you said, in that one thing that you talked about, bile, that just stuck in my head. But if I take bile salts, then I can get too much fat in because now I'm just opening the door. Like, is all this biohacking stuff more dangerous than what it's worth?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, like, we don't know. We don't know what all these things do, and we have good guesses. We have some mechanistic data. I mean, even some things on things like metformin or low dose rapamycin, in animal studies that show that this improves longevity and prolongs life. Why is it prolonging life? Is it are they doing something special on their own, or are they undoing some harmful physiological process that's happening to us because we're eating the wrong thing? Metformin, I think it's probably its mechanism for extending life is that it lowers blood sugar, lowers insulin. Right. So, lower insulin, lower blood sugar, that is going to be better for your body. And that is understandable why you would live longer. Maybe there are other mechanisms as well, but that's a big one. And the thing is, remember I said that humans are designed genetically to live 120 years. So, we're already losing out on like 50 years just by eating the wrong thing. So, can something make you live 5 years longer? Maybe. We don't have any definitive proof in humans yet that it will do that. But in what context? Because if you just stop eating the wrong thing, you should make it to 120 without doing anything special. So the thing is about having an average life expectancy of 120 genetically means that if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up, you should make it to 120 without doing anything else. Just being alive, you should make it there as long as you don't get killed by something, right? So we're dying decades before that. That means something is killing us, okay? Slow poison is still poison. You smoke your whole life, you will die younger. That's the deal. If you eat things that aren't designed for you and have toxins, you will die younger. That's the deal. So if you just get rid of all that stuff, and you're going to make it to 120, all of us start at different times. So if we were doing this from birth, 120, you started at 40 like I did, or 38, maybe not as long, but maybe we'll see what happens. And, so you're already getting back a huge amount from that. Now, is metformin going to add another 5 years onto that 120 if you're not eating this sort of stuff? I don't know. No one knows. And so, because we don't know, you're just putting in a chemical in your body that doesn't necessarily belong there. And why is that? Now we use plants as medicine and we extract certain things from those plants and put those in pills like digitalis, digoxin, which comes from foxglove. And we sort of realized that could help people with sort of with heart failure. It wasn't beating very strong, and we could use this to increase the contractility of the heart. However, this is a toxin. The plant's not making this in order to help people with heart disease, right? The plant was making digitalis long before humans even existed, let alone humans with heart disease. And so if you eat enough of this stuff, there's enough digitalis, it will stop your heart. And so if you give somebody too much digoxin, digitalis, their heart will stop. You'll get a fatal arrhythmia. Your heart will stop and you will die. And that's what that's designed for. So these are toxins. And so people are like microdosing psilocybin and these different sorts of, mushroom, toxins and things like that. And they're saying, oh, this is great for these sorts of reasons. Maybe, maybe not, but these are toxins. Now you're using those toxins in a certain way. Rapamycin is a toxin. Metformin, all medicine is a toxin. It's just that in certain circumstances, at certain doses, it confers more benefit than harm. But it's all a poison. It's just in certain circumstances that poison can be beneficial. Antibiotics, they're bad for you unless you have a bacterial infection that is susceptible to that antibiotic. But you wouldn't just take antibiotics for any reason, right? And this is, it goes into plants too. You'll say like garlic, well, has natural antibiotics. Oh, you should take garlic all the time, just natural. Are you sick? Do you have an infection? Then why are you doing that? You're going to destroy your oral biome. You're going to destroy your microbiome, right? You need these bacteria. Why are you killing, and why are you putting those chemicals in your body if you don't actually need them to fight off an infection? Well, mushrooms have anti-VEGF. This is good against cancer. I'm like, okay, do you have cancer? Then why are you taking chemo? We use anti-VEGF as a chemotherapy agent, and you're taking mushrooms because it has this chemotherapy agent in it. Wouldn't you think for a second and realize that that's probably a toxic event if you don't have that specific issue that that could be helped by it? So, I think that we already have about 50 years just to make up just by eating properly. That you don't need all this biohacking stuff. That's the biggest biohack that there is. You get another 50 years of good health, not good health, but optimal health, feeling better than you do right now for another 100 years. Like, that's fine. That's all the biohacking I need, and the thing is because I do plan on doing things special. I do plan on working out. I do plan on exercising. I do plan on taking care of myself. And so I plan on living over 120. I'm right now, my mind is I'm on a 130-year timeline. That's how I'm thinking. That's how I'm planning out my life. And so, I've got plenty of time to see how the whole metformin, rapamycin, biohacking stuff works out. So other people can sort of, take that bait, and they can do that if they want. And I'm happy to sort of study the aftermath. And 30 years from now, if it shows that, yeah, it's a great idea to do X, Y, and Z, like, sure, I'll pick it up. But you know what? You got time. And if you are eating the way you're supposed to eat, you're going to be getting back so much more time and so much more health that, the other stuff is just window dressing at that point, even if it does work, which we have no proof it does.
What's interesting to me is it's talking about repair, right? It's talking about improvement. It's talking about pushing your body to the best of the best. But our body wants to heal itself. Like that's the whole point. Like, if you give it the proper food, like you're saying, and what you're helping me to understand is the proper food isn't even as wide as I was thinking it needed to be. It's like, it can be really, really specific. My body gets the right food, it will repair itself. I'm wondering how fasting plays a role from your perspective. A lot of times, especially in keto, it's like you start keto and then you need to be fasting, and there's all this stuff. And I mean, granted, I do one meal a day, but that's more about laziness than anything else. But I'm wondering, for all those people that really do focus and want to be like fasting for 5 to 7 days. I've never made 7. That's a sad point for me, but fasting for many days. And then, like, is there a good reason to fast? Is fasting just not necessary? Like, I kind of thought I was told that during fast, your body repairs more, but I'm not sure how that plays here.
As far as I understand the literature, you get the same amount of autophagy and repair and stem cell promotion just by being in that metabolic state, just having low insulin and low blood sugar and being in that zero carb metabolic state, the so-called fasting state, which I think is our primary metabolic state. So to my understanding, it's the same. So from what I understand, the most benefit that you get just comes from not eating stupid things that are harmful to you, and specifically being in the correct biochemical process and metabolic state. That's what I understand to be the most beneficial. Now, are we designed to deal with famine? Yeah, absolutely. Predators in general don't typically get a kill every day necessarily. Our ancestors did largely. We would take down a mastodon. We'd eat like kings for months or maybe a year or more until the herds came through again. We were able to scare them off a cliff, take one or two of these suckers down, and we were good for the rest of the year. Right. Same with the Native Americans and the buffalo and buffalo drops. They would have one big hunt, get all this buffalo, all these bison, and they'd dry them and they'd have it for the year. And there was a Native American tribe in Washington State on the Columbia River, and they estimated that if you figured out the wealth of a people by how much time out of their day they spent for the necessities of life, getting food and this and that this would have been the richest civilization that has ever existed, because they had these giant weirs and nets on the Columbia River that just constantly caught big 90-pound salmon. They didn't do anything for them. They had unlimited amount of food at all time. And so that's perfectly normal too. So I don't think you have to fast. And I don't think that there would have been any sort of biological mechanism to require fasting, that something has to happen. We have to stop eating. We have to not eat for 5 days, or else a certain necessary biological, physiological function won't turn on. That doesn't make any evolutionary sense. It doesn't make any biological sense. If a lion can eat every day, it will. If humans can eat in the wild every day, they will. They're adapted. They're able. They have the ability to go days or weeks without it. And they can store a bunch of bile, and they can get a huge bolus of fat in at the time, and they can make up for lost time. But I don't think that that's required. So I think, yeah, the most benefit you get from fasting really just comes from not eating the wrong things and from being in the right metabolic state, from what I can see. So I don't think that people have to fast. If they want to fast, they can. I think the only time that it comes down to that you need to fast is when you have cancer. And this is because this really helps drive down the blood sugar and drive up your ketones, which has been shown in clinical trials to help your body fight off cancer, because it's starving out those cancer cells. So we talked earlier about cancer cells having damaged mitochondria. Well, they can't use glucose properly. It's called the Warburg effect. They need 400 times the amount of glucose for their cellular mechanics and the high metabolic demand that they have. And because their mitochondria aren't functioning, they have to ferment this stuff in the cytoplasm. So it's much less efficient. Causes a bunch of free radicals, causes more damage, and all that sort of stuff. But so when you go on a ketogenic diet, like a carnivore diet, like we're supposed to be in anyway, first of all, after 3 months, without fasting at all, just in the fasting state, you have 4 times the mitochondria, and they're 4 times effective. You get all the autophagy and the mitophagy and the turnover already, just by being in that metabolic state and no fasting. So in cancer, it's really helpful because now you're just limiting the amount of glucose that's available. And your glucose is going down, ketones are going up. All of your cells can run on ketones. In fact, many of them prefer ketones. But cancer cells can't, because the mitochondria are destroyed, and you need your mitochondria to use ketones for energy. But they can use glucose, and they can use glutamine. And if you limit that, glutamine is going to be in meat. It's going to be in plant though as well. It's a ubiquitous protein, and you make it, right? It's a non-essential amino acid. So, this limits the amount of blood sugar. This limits the level of blood sugar. So it limits the amount of glucose. It limits the amount of glutamine. It lowers your blood sugar. It raises your ketones. And this has been shown in clinical trials and preclinical trials to improve cancer outcomes. And so I think fasting is probably a very good idea. In cancer, everybody else probably doesn't make that much of a difference. And again, you run the risk of slowing your metabolism. You fast too much, and your body thinks, we haven't eaten in a week. Haven't gotten a kill in a week. We don't know how long this famine is going to last. We need to shut it down. So you run the risk of lowering your metabolism as well if you fast for too long. A day here and there, probably not going to do much to your metabolism, but you start getting past that. You start doing multiple days in a row, like you'll slim down a bit. You probably feel really good, but the thing is that after that, your body's going to say, okay, well, we need to start putting on more fat. So you might actually get a bit of a rebounding effect, or it just comes back. So it just depends. But you run that risk anyway of slowing down your metabolism as well.
What about if when you're already at your goal? Like I've kept fasting in like twice a year just because I was under the impression it's this healthy thing that we're supposed to be doing. I got to my goal weight within 5 months. So I've been 6 years, 5.5 years, something like that at goal. So I'm just wondering, are you saying kind of like it's okay to do, but it's not necessary? Is that kind of how I'm hearing this?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I think we're fully capable of fasting without much deleterious effects. Some fasting studies show that some people have some problems, skin, hair, nail problems. They might lose hair, and getting a minimum of 100 grams of protein a day will stop hair loss in some of these studies. But mammals hibernate all the time, and so they just build up fat, and then they just run on that fat for a while. There was a gentleman in Scotland, I believe, who was quite overweight. He was like over 600 pounds, like 650 pounds or something like that. And he ended up just deciding that mammals fast. I'm going to do that. Or they hibernate, I should say. He's like, I'm going to do the same thing. So he just drank water and took a multivitamin every day. And that was it. And he got a blood test every month with his doctor just to make sure that everything was okay. So I was like, yeah, look, you're fine. And he walked to work every day. So he walked to work and he just didn't eat for over a year. And he lost most of his excess weight just by doing that. So, we're fully capable of doing it. What does it cause? Does it give you extra benefit? I don't think so. I've spoken to people about this who have I haven't spoken to like Jason Fung about this, and he's big into fasting. But I have spoken to other people who've done a lot of research into fasting. I've asked them, I was like, hey, look, a lot of the studies that I've seen are on fasting mimicking diets. And they say, look, there's all these benefits to fasting. What about a diet that mimics fasting, gets you in the metabolic state that you would be at fasting, but you actually get to eat, which is very difficult to fast? That's a ketogenic diet, right? It's just you're in that fasting state. And so they found, at least in the studies that I saw, for those specific endpoints, for like medical issues and health related things, that it was the same outcome. In fact, some had a better outcome on the ketogenic diet rather than just not eating the whole time. So those are the ones I've seen. I haven't seen every study on fasting, but I've asked other people who've seen a lot more studies on fasting. I said, hey, look, is there any evidence? Is there any data out there to show a benefit on top of just our optimal diet, just not eating the wrong thing, just being on a ketogenic sort of diet? Is there a benefit on top of that to just not eating, just withholding food from your body when it's asking for it? Because I eat once a day too, but that's because my body doesn't need more than that. I eat 2 pounds of fatty meat in one go. I'm full, and that's it. And I'm not hungry for another 24 hours unless I'm very active and I'm working out and my body wants to put on muscle. Then I need to eat more, or I won't put on muscle, or I won't put it on as fast. But that's not fasting, because I'm just not eating because I'm not hungry, right? And so fasting is when you're specifically depriving your body of food when you are hungry. And so I've asked them that. I was like, is there a benefit on top of these things? And the people I've spoken to, like Dr. John Jaquish, who has a PhD in, exercise and physiology, and knows a lot about fasting, and likes fasting. He said, we just don't really have those studies. We just don't really know. And so we don't have anything that's shown like a difference or improvement. So as far as I understand, there isn't anything extra that you get from doing it. You certainly can do it, but I don't think that you need to do it. I think the vast majority of benefit comes from just not eating stupid things.
So the clarification note that I will add to this. So when I do typically 5 days, really like it's not hard for me to do. And maybe that's a clarification note. Like I might have a moment of hungry that happens, but then like I wouldn't even have time to get a glass of water or something and it kind of passes. Versus like my rule for myself anyways is that when I get hunger that doesn't like that's there, that's like, okay, Violet, you're hungry, I eat. Like this last time I only made 3 days. On the third day, like I was getting a clear signal like, no, you're hungry. I ate. So then would you say that's not fasting?
Well, if you are getting signals that you're hungry, but you're just the hunger signals are going to be much more subtle when you're on a keto carnivore diet. And so, when I'm, if I'm at the hospital, I'm on call, and I'm I've got 3 operations to do overnight, and it's 11 p.m. and I haven't eaten since the day before 10 p.m. and I think like, ooh, kind of want to eat. My body's like, hey, gotta eat. And I think in my head, I'm like, well, I've got this surgery, I've got 2 surgeries after that. This is really going to go until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I'm going to be late to rounds at that point, and I've got to be I'm not going to be done until 6, 7, 8 o'clock the next night, and so I'm probably not going to eat until then. My body just goes, yep, that's fine, because it sees my leptin, it knows how much fat is in my body, it knows I'm not going to die. Even very slender people, unless you're extremely emaciated, will have weeks of energy and fat available to run your body before you start catabolizing your muscles. Before you start breaking down your muscles, you have to get through weeks worth of fat, even for very slender people. And so my body knows that. And so it's just like, yeah, you should eat. Can't eat. No problem. We'll see you tomorrow. Like that's sort of the signal you get. But that sounds like sort of what you're having. And so your body is telling you to eat. So, it would have sort of like, I'm hungry. But it sort of got to the point where it's like, hey, I'm not messing around this time. You need to eat. So I do think that that's fasting. It's just that, your body can handle it. It's just that your body knows that it has plenty of stores. It did want food. Doesn't have to have it, but it wanted it. You didn't give it to it. Not a big deal. The Mongols, like Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, they would routinely go 5 days without eating. They would just ravage the countryside and just terrorize Asia and Europe, and without eating. And then they'd eat 10 pounds of horse meat, and they do it again. And that seemed to suit them. They drank horse blood. They may have done that more often than they ate the meat, but it's perfectly fine if you want to do that. I don't think you have to do that. I don't think it's something like we should do this because it's going to give us a benefit on top of our typically appropriate, biologically appropriate diet.
Oh, it's just because I thought, like, again, that whole idea of like autophagy, apoptosis, all those internal processes that, like, I think doctors like Dr. Ekberg, for example, talks about those processes that happen while you're fasting. So I thought, and I think Dr. Fung kind of talks about it too. So,
Yeah.
like, these processes that happen while you're fasting, although he's more focused on the weight loss portion. Um, but you're saying, like, you can have those things when you're eating.
Oh, 100%. You will get autophagy. You will get mitophagy. It turns over the mitochondria specifically, so you get newer, faster, stronger mitochondria and more of them. We have studies showing that people on a ketogenic diet for 3 months, again, have 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective. That's not from fasting. That's from being in a fasting metabolism. Your body just turns on. All your heavy machinery comes to bear. You do get autophagy. You do get mitophagy. I don't think it's because you're not eating that you now start turning on these normal physiological functions. I think it's when you start eating the right things, when you stop eating things that are interrupting your normal physiological processes. That may not be wholly true. You do get autophagy. You do get mitophagy. Do you get more by not eating? I don't know. I don't know that answer. Maybe that's the case, but I think that you will, well, I know that you will still get a large production in that arena just by eating a normal diet. And if there's benefit on top of that, potentially, but I don't think you have to do it to get autophagy. One of the arguments is you're in a fasting metabolism, your body's looking for energy and it's scrounging up things, so it's just breaking down old cells. and just using them as energy. Maybe. I mean, these are theories, right? These are theories that people are they're sort of anthropomorphizing these things, or our body's looking for these things. Our body's just carrying out physiological processes, right? And so is that because we are lacking energy? Well, long before your body is going to start cannibalizing its own cells, it's going to use your fat, right? And so if someone is very overweight and has a lot of excess fat, there's plenty to use there. It's not going to, if autophagy was purely for energy generation, then you'd have to get very skinny and emaciated before you started turning that on. So I don't buy that. I think that this is just a normal physiological pattern, and this is a normal physiological process in our body that is being uprooted and derailed by eating things that don't have any business in our body. And so our entire physiology and metabolism changes because of this spike in insulin. And so you just get that down, and then your body starts working normally. And you do get autophagy. You do get mitophagy, because that's a normal function. You're supposed to turn over your old damaged, battered cells. You're supposed to turn over and replace your battered, senile mitochondria. That's a normal thing. That's just normal housekeeping in your body. And so I don't think you have to starve yourself and then your body's like, oh, now I'm good as new. Because it would be a survival advantage to do that. It would be better for the species. You get younger, you get stronger, you get healthier by not eating. So those are sort of disconnected, right? Because that wouldn't really happen in a natural state, because you can eat not enough and then you die. Most animals are fighting against famine and lack of nutrient resources and starvation. So I don't think that makes selection pressure sense. And so because it would be a selection pressure to be a less efficient hunter and less good at our job. You know what I mean? Because that would make us live longer, that would make us healthier if we were starving for a week or so every now and then. So maybe, but I think strongly that all of this stuff happens.
Maybe I'll add to that I can see where this might be another case of reading the data to a conclusion. So for example, what we were saying earlier about these medications, or so these plants give us this benefit, even though there's all these toxic other things happening. Maybe it's just a matter of the fact that, well, of course our body wouldn't just stop working if we don't have food. And so these other processes might just be upregulated when we're not eating, because it just makes sense. While we're not eating, some of these things just happen more. And they do give us a bit of energy, which is terrific too, but it's not necessarily that we have to do it, is what I'm understanding from you. It's your body will repair itself regardless. Because for me, that's the reason. My sole reason is about repair, because I'm at goal weight. I'm not trying to lose anything. As a matter of fact, I stress if I lose anything. So it's I'm just trying to make sure that, any silly heart, lung, anything that was happening while I was eating normal diet that I didn't know was happening, can I give my body the best, scenario to repair itself? And you're saying, not harming me to do it, but probably not necessary either.
I think so. I mean, like I said, I don't know all the studies, but that's from what I understand of our biochemistry and physiology, and from the studies that I've read and understand, and just understanding, how our bodies work and how that would fit in nature. I don't think it's necessarily an added benefit to just withhold food if it's good food, if it's the right food, and your body's telling you to eat it. If you're just eating once a day, and your body's only telling you to eat once a day, most of that time your body's not digesting food. Most of that time your body is repairing and rebuilding and just living and just being a body. And so if you're just eating meat, you will liquefy and absorb that within a few hours. It's actually very efficient. And so that's just in your body and it's just doing its thing. And now you're in that fasting mode for solid 20 hours or so, and your body's just doing what it's supposed to do. And so I think that that's almost certainly going to be exactly what we're designed for. That is what we're designed for. That is what we've been doing. And so I think that that's where you're going to get most of the physiological benefit. I don't want to say for certain, because I can't say for certain. Maybe there's a benefit on top of just eating the right thing, of just not eating at all. But a lot of these fasting studies, a lot of these ketogenic studies really just come down to the fact that you're eating things that don't belong in your body, and your body's reacting negatively to it. And when you remove them, things start working again. Things start working better because you drop the anchor, and now your body can actually work properly.
This has been so fascinating. I have to say, like you've answered so many of the questions that I've just had for the very longest of time. How can people contact you, like get more of you? Because I really feel like, first of all, I'm happy that I was told to look you up, and I want people to have more information. Like, how can they reach you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been lovely talking to you. And yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD. Chaffee spelled CHA, as in Frank, double E as in Edward. And I have a podcast just called The Plant Free MD. It's all about the benefits of not eating plants. And then my Instagram is just, again, Anthony Chaffee, MD. And if people want Twitter, it's Anthony_Chaffee. But usually YouTube, that's my main thing, and the podcast.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Wellness Warriors, if you would like to start a healthy keto carnivore diet, there's some videos on the screen right there to get you started. Talk to you again next week.